In this story, we'll follow Maria, a civilian nurse who, aboard a commercial flight, saves a man from cardiac arrest using her equipment and training. Despite bringing hope and life, the airline fires her 24 hours later for exceeding her duties. Yet the echo of her bravery reverberates through thousands of signatures on an online petition, support from colleagues and the media, a mention by a congressman, and a viral interview on social media. Finally, Maria is invited to the White House, where her case inspires an executive order that reinstates her, exempts volunteer healthcare workers from liability, and sets a precedent for protecting lives at sea and in the air. Before listening to this story, subscribe and hit the bell, and give us a like so you don't miss any of our stories. Let's begin! Maria took a deep breath before crossing the plane's threshold. She was wearing her civilian uniform, a white blouse and dark pants, with no insignia to betray her nursing profession. At first glance, no one would suspect that this woman with her serene gaze and firm gait was carrying a backpack loaded with medical instruments and a perfectly organized first aid kit, the result of years of habit. With her rolling suitcase in one hand and her bag over her shoulder, she walked down the center aisle, nodding briefly to the crew. The engines roared softly beneath her feet, a familiar sensation after so many reunions and goodbyes. She thought about the destination, an ordinary city, a routine flight. Nothing out of the ordinary for her passenger schedule. Her eyes lingered for a moment on the windows, where the morning sky tinged the clouds orange and purple. That landscape, however, was not to be the most lasting memory of her journey. Upon reaching the economy section, the aisle narrowed, and the tightly packed passengers began swapping suitcases, shaking out blankets and adjusting cushions. Maria calmly followed the line, mentally assessing the seats. As she walked, her mind raced over the playlist she'd chosen for the trip, a mystery audiobook that promised to keep her entertained for the next few hours. However, nothing would capture her attention like an unexpected event. The flight attendant counter was already occupied by two attendants guiding other passengers, and the flow of suitcases rolled to the back of the overhead compartment. Maria looked for a space to store hers. The compartments were almost full. Although she had a reserved seat in row 15, she decided to move forward a little further to avoid a last-minute rush. Every step brought her closer to her destination, but also further away from a world where everything seemed under control. In the murmured silence, some passengers glanced at her, sensing an unusual confidence in her demeanor. She smiled shyly and continued on her way. Then, she spotted a space in the compartment just above row 18. Just enough room for her suitcase. Deftly, she lifted it and carefully pushed it into place, making sure it was secure. With her suitcase out of sight, Maria turned to find her seat and noticed that most of them were already occupied. She took a deep breath, feeling, for the first time, like any other passenger. She placed her hand on the back of the nearby seat and looked for the row marked on her boarding pass. Row 15, seat C, he whispered as he walked to the back of the plane. That would be the beginning of a journey that, without knowing it, would change his life and test every one of his reflexes. Maria walked down the aisle with measured steps, carefully observing every detail around her. The dim overhead lights marked a luminous path that reflected off the metal surfaces of the compartments. On either side, the seatbacks formed a mosaic of dark cushions dotted with patterned headboards. The constant murmur of the passengers mingled with the soft hum of the ventilation system, creating a soundtrack worthy of an aerial tram. From her position next to the boarding gate, she could see the irregular flow of travelers. Some were arranging their carry-on luggage, others were nodding to their companions, and a few were intently checking their boarding passes. Each face told a different story. Families, couples, executives, and backpackers. To her right, a tall man was looking through a fashion magazine. To her left, two children were playing with a tablet. Maria took in the scene with the serenity of someone watching a movie on pause. The company of passengers felt lively and diverse. An elderly man with a cane stopped in front of a flight attendant, asking for help placing his suitcase in the overhead compartment. A flight attendant politely assisted, while another crew member asked for headphones and blankets. The aisle seemed to narrow as it moved toward the rear of the plane, and the slight roll of the fuselage made one's feet feel unsteady. That feeling of lightness and movement was almost hypnotic, but Maria didn't lose her concentration. With each step, she mentally reviewed the safety measures she'd studied in nursing school. Observe, assess, act. Although there was no medical emergency in sight at that moment, her body was responding to the routine of dealing with unexpected events. Nevertheless, she made an effort to appear as just another passenger, without standing out. She avoided meeting the crew's gaze, not out of guilt but out of prudence. She didn't want them to assume any professional roles prematurely. When she reached row 15, she noticed that every seat was occupied. Maria felt each seatback, whispering to herself, 15A, 15B, 15C. No one seemed willing to give up their spot, and several passengers quickly swapped seats. A young man swapped seats with an elderly woman to group his family together. A couple sat opposite each other, looking for the window. There weren't a single space left. Feeling the slight weight of frustration, he kept moving. The aisle snaked to row 17, and then opened back up to the rear economy class. There, in row 18, he discovered an empty seat, 18B. He paused for a moment, feeling the backrest and mentally checking its location relative to the emergency exit. He took a deep breath and headed toward it, dragging his wheeled suitcase behind him. The corner of row 18 seemed to offer an unexpected refuge. A large window to gaze at the clouds, a comfortable distance from the other passengers, and a free arm to rest her bag on. Maria placed her suitcase under the seat in front of her and slung her bag over her shoulder before taking her seat. She fastened her seatbelt with a soft click and adjusted the seat back to the upright position, ready for takeoff. As she settled in, she looked around. The compartment in row 17 was rocking slightly with the initial turbulence, and the reading light in front of her was on. She adjusted the light so it illuminated the aisle, though not too brightly, and took the audiobook she'd been thinking about out of her bag. She turned on her headphones, and just as the voiceover began to narrate the mystery, she heard a faint whisper coming from row 15. "Is that gentleman okay?" a concerned voice asked. Maria looked up, truly noticing row 15 for the first time. Seat 15C showed a pale, sweaty man, almost motionless against the seatback. His expression contrasted with the calmness of the rest of the aisle. A pang of intuition ran through her. Something was wrong, and she would be the one to notice it. Maria felt a chill run down her spine as the conversation began to gesticulate around her. The murmur in the aisle grew higher-pitched, as if everyone had shared a single thought. She put her audiobook aside and looked toward row 15, where a small group of passengers were quietly exchanging comments. "Did you see how pale he went?" a middle-aged woman whispered, adjusting her vest. "He's completely white. I noticed he was sweating a lot, but it didn't seem like he had a fever." A young businessman replied, frowning. "He's barely breathing." An elderly man, leaning on his cane next to the seat, nodded gravely. "I heard him cough a couple of times before he went still. Maybe he was fainting." Maria pressed her lips together. The passenger's tone indicated concern rather than simple gossip. Something serious was happening. She looked at the pale stranger lying in 15C and saw how his chest barely moved when he breathed. Next to him, seat 15B was empty, and 15A was occupied by an older woman who now also had her back to the aisle, asking a flight attendant what was happening. "Stewardess, can I help with anything?" the woman asked. "That person doesn't seem well." The flight attendant approached with measured steps and a professional smile, trying to put everyone at ease. Please remain calm. I'm going to check your pulse and see if you can hold out until landing. The young businessman, impatient, raised his voice. Is there still a long way to go? The crew exchanged glances, the answer caught in the flight attendant's throat. We won't be more than an hour away, he replied. But I'll do my best to keep it stable. Maria paused for a moment. Her instinct told her the man needed urgent help, and they wouldn't wait until landing. Stealthily, she slipped her hand into the pocket of her jacket where she kept her business card. She always carried it with her, hidden under her street clothes. She breathed again, feeling the weight of her calling. She could intervene without permission, but she knew that a timely intervention could save a life. Meanwhile, a whisper of admiration ran through the hall. They say there are nurses among the passengers. Yes, I met her at the boarding. She was carrying a huge first aid kit, another passenger added, approaching Maria. If anyone can help, it can be her. Maria's eyes narrowed. Several passengers were looking at her expectantly. The flight attendant, preoccupied with her protocol, didn't seem ready to act until the captain authorized it. Maria made a decision. She stood up determinedly, dropping the audiobook to the floor. With a determined stride, she headed toward row 15. Every glance she received urged her forward. She couldn't stay on the sidelines. As she reached the man, she gently nodded toward the flight attendant. "Excuse me, I'm a registered nurse, and I have equipment," she said, looking up to show her card. The aisle fell silent. The flight attendant, surprised, nodded without hesitation. Maria leaned forward in her seat, gently pressing the backrest to get close enough to row 15. The pale man, whose breathing was already difficult to distinguish, slid a few inches to the side, as if losing the grip of gravity. His eyes, half open, stared into space, unable to focus. A trickle of sweat ran down his temples, and his dry lips trembled slightly. She held her breath. Her mind flashed through the signs of a possible fainting spell or heart attack. Extreme pallor, cold sweat, shallow, weak breathing. She shifted her gaze to the nearby passengers, who were frowning and murmuring with growing anxiety. A woman had placed a trembling hand on the man's arm, but stepped back when she noticed the chill in his skin. Another person approached the flight attendant, asking if there was a doctor on board. The crew, visibly nervous, exchanged glances, seeking instructions from the captain. Maria noticed the man begin to slide down the side of the seat, his head falling to his right shoulder. At that moment, her professional instinct flipped on like a switch. She was no longer just another passenger. She was a nurse with a responsibility to act. Without hesitation, she stood up and raised her hand to get the flight attendant's attention. Her voice was calm but firm. "Excuse me, I need space next to that passenger," he said. "He's going to completely collapse." The flight attendant opened her arms to clear the adjacent seats, while other passengers quickly backed away, clearing the aisle. Maria moved forward with a determined stride. The man, who had been left almost in a semi-recumbent position, was hanging over the edge of the seat like a misplaced mannequin. His pale, sweaty hands gripped the armrests, but only with the slackness of someone who no longer has a will of his own. Maria placed one hand on the patient's forehead and checked his temperature. It was freezing. With the other, she palpated the carotid artery. She felt no pulse. To the naked eye, his breathing was almost imperceptible, a slight rise and fall of his chest. She tried to speak to him in a soothing voice. "Sir, I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you. Keep your eyes on me." There was no response. The constant drone of the engines mingled with the rapid beat of his own heart. He knew every second counted. Cardiopulmonary arrest at cruising altitude without rapid intervention could be fatal. A couple of passengers gently bumped hands in an encouraging gesture, while the flight attendant handed him a small bag containing sterile gloves and a towel. Maria quickly put them on. It was then that the entire seat structure gave way a little, and the man finally collapsed. His head fell onto the front seat back, and his body was almost completely horizontal in his own lap. Maria took a step back, measured the distance, and with a fluid movement, moved the unfolded tray table out of the way to create space. The distinctive smell of the cabin, a mix of reheated coffee and air freshener, seemed to dim in the urgency of the moment. Without wasting another second, she turned to her handbag, open on the floor at her feet, and pulled out the carefully organized medical kit. Its metal surface gleamed in the dim cabin lighting. She spread the first aid kit on the fold-down tray, removed the straps securing the belts, and unfolded each instrument with the precision of someone who had done it 1,000 times. Syringes for tubes, blood pressure cuffs, and, in the center compartment, the small portable defibrillator. With her eyes fixed on the patient, Maria palpated the carotid pulse again, confirming its absence, and prepared the defibrillator pads. At that moment, the man, completely collapsed in his seat, stopped resisting. His body stiffened slightly, awaiting the electric shock that would revive his heart rate. Maria raised her voice to inform the crew. "I need extra space and assistance reclining the seat and positioning the makeshift stretcher. Please!" The flight attendants obeyed instantly. One lowered the seat back of the seat next to her. Another removed a loose suitcase to widen the aisle. The recumbent passenger became a patient who could be worked on, and the cabin air was filled with an expectant silence interrupted only by the buzzing of the emergency lights. Maria stepped back for just a moment to gather momentum. With firm hands, she slammed the first aid kit shut and lifted it, feeling the concentrated weight of all her medical equipment. Her heart was pounding, but every breath reminded her of years of training. In an emergency, first move. She spun around and, dodging suitcases and passengers' feet, began to move quickly down the narrow aisle. Murmurs of surprise and urgency multiplied as she passed. A flight attendant, seeing her running with the first aid kit in the air, exclaimed, "Space, please, space." Immediately, several people moved back, moving their bodies and suitcases to clear the passage. The young man who had been swapping seats hours earlier quickly stood up, leaving the neighboring row free. A family joined in unison, creating a makeshift aisle. The engines hummed tirelessly as Maria moved forward, dodging elbows and backpacks. Carrying the first aid kit in one arm, she glanced briefly at her wristwatch. Every second was vital. The cabin lights seemed to have become tinged with urgency. She reached the center of the plane, right in front of row 16, and, without pausing, crossed to row 15. That stretch became a lit corridor that guided her to the patient. Her shoes tapped softly on the carpet, and the echo of her breathing was drowned out by the collective expectation. Upon reaching the collapsed man's side, he bent down decisively. He placed the first aid kit on the back of the front seat, opened the metal lid, and quickly removed an extra pair of gloves. Staring at the patient's motionless chest, he nodded to the flight attendant who had come forward to assist him. Her voice, between measured breaths, indicated, "Help me recline the seat and move this out of the way," he said, pointing to a small folding table that was still in the way. The flight attendant nodded, and within seconds, the area was clear. The passengers, witnessing her determination, remained expectantly silent. Maria squatted down next to the man and took 2 defibrillator pads out of their pouch. The emergency had begun, and she was ready. Maria heard the slight creak of the hinges as she activated the seatback lever. The flight attendant, following her instructions, was carefully tilting seat 15C, reclining it to a near-horizontal position. The man, still unconscious, gently yielded to gravity, aligning his back with the new angle. Each movement was performed with a mixture of firmness and delicacy, so as not to aggravate any possible injury. Meanwhile, another flight attendant and a volunteer passenger worked together to move the adjacent seats out of the way. The tray table in row 15D was folded down and stowed away, freeing up extra space in the narrow aisle. A backpack resting next to seat 14A was moved to the overhead luggage area, and a pair of suitcases placed on the floor were moved to the center, creating a small clearing. Maria watched every movement. She needed enough space to deploy the improvised stretcher, formed by several seats joined together, and to maneuver the defibrillator safely. The emergency lights flickered for a moment, reflecting the tension of the moment on the passengers' faces. A man in a blue shirt removed his jacket and placed it on a backrest to cushion the floor and prevent the patient's head from hitting the closed tray table. Another passenger handed over a thin cushion, which Maria placed under the patient's neck. In seconds, the area around row 15 had been transformed into a makeshift operating room. The seats formed a precarious stretcher, the spotlights made it possible to see every detail, and the confined space was free of obstacles. Maria stood for a moment to assess the results. The patient was almost horizontal, his head resting on the cushion and his torso accessible. The man's arms were free at his sides, ready to attach the defibrillator pads. Her flight colleagues, now an emergency team, waited silently, trusting her to make the right decisions. The torrent of murmurs had died away, giving way to an expectant silence. Only the steady hum of the ventilation system and the accelerated heartbeat in Maria's chest could be heard. With the area prepared, she inhaled deeply, feeling the steady pulse beneath her palm. Every second counted, and the makeshift stage was ready for the next crucial step. Maria carefully observed the patient's position. The makeshift stretcher, made from reclined seats and a few cushions, was her only recourse for stabilizing the man. Although space was limited, she had managed to clear enough to act. She placed the defibrillator pads precisely, ensuring they adhered well to the patient's chest. The tension in the air was palpable. The nervous passengers awaited the next move, and the flight attendant, who had been helping with the rearrangement of the space, approached cautiously. "Is everything ready, nurse?" he asked, watching Maria finish inserting the defibrillator pads. "Almost," Maria replied, without taking her eyes off the man. "I need you to clear the area, and everyone to move back. This is going to be quick." A couple of passengers stepped aside, retreating to the ends of the aisle. The flight attendant stood back, waiting for instructions. Maria pulled the device from the first aid kit, a portable defibrillator she'd tested in several simulations, but had never used in a real situation before. She was ready, but she couldn't stop feeling the pressure of every passing second. A cardiac arrest was always a critical emergency, and the man in front of her seemed to be in a much more serious situation than she'd imagined. "Ready," Maria said firmly, looking at the crew. No one responded, but they all knew what was going to happen. The machine emitted a low beep as Maria adjusted the device and plugged it into the power outlet. The green light flashed, indicating everything was ready for the download. Wasting no time, she pressed the button decisively. The shock was immediate and powerful. The man's body, inert and lifeless, shook violently from the impact of the current. The air was filled with a dull sound, as if lightning had struck the enclosed space of the cabin. Maria didn't allow herself to falter. She looked at the patient, watching for any reaction. The flight attendant, who had been on the edge of her seat, held her breath. The man didn't react immediately. Maria repeated the procedure. The machine performed another scan, and another beep indicated that she should perform chest compressions. Without hesitation, Maria began the maneuvers. Her firm hands pressed on the man's chest at the precise rate. 30 compressions for every 2 artificial breaths. Each pressure was a desperate attempt to revive him, but also a reminder of how difficult it was to save a life in those conditions. A passenger who had been watching from the aisle approached cautiously. "Is he getting better?" he asked, his voice worried. Maria raised her head for a moment and nodded, even though she knew the battle was far from won. every compression and every attempt at breathing was a reflection of her dedication. She needed the man to breathe again, needed his heart to beat again. As she continued the maneuvers, fatigue began to take its toll on her body, but she couldn't stop. She knew the man's life depended on her. The rest of the plane remained silent, watching the nurse's efforts. "Please," a woman exclaimed, clearly anxious. "How much longer?" Maria looked at him with focused eyes and asked him to step back. She had no time for distractions. She would keep working until the man reacted, no matter how exhausted she felt. Seconds passed, and the passenger's breathing seemed like a distant echo in her mind. The blood continued pumping in her head as her chest filled with air and uncertainty. However, something changed. The man, after the third round of compressions, made a faint sound, an attempt to breathe. Maria stopped dead in her tracks and leaned over him. "Come on, please," he murmured, as the machine ran another scan. A blink. The man's eyes opened slowly, almost as if waking from a long sleep. His chest rose a little more, this time more forcefully, and a dry, shaky cough escaped his lips. Maria, relieved but alert, continued to monitor his breathing. "He's reacting," she said quietly to herself as she looked at the man. The flight attendant, who had been waiting for instructions, approached cautiously. "What do we do now?" he asked, his eyes fixed on the patient, who was beginning to breathe more steadily. Maria, with a sigh of relief, responded quickly. "We'll take him to the hospital as soon as we land. We can't leave him alone." The passengers, who had been on the verge of panic, slowly began to relax when they saw that the man was no longer so pale. His breathing, although still weak, had stabilized enough to allow him to survive until landing. Maria continued monitoring the patient, aware that much remained to be done. Maria didn't hesitate for a second. Seeing the charging symbol on the defibrillator, she prepared for the first shock. The tension in the cabin was palpable, the silence heavy, as she, with firm and determined hands, adjusted the pads to the patient's chest area. Everything about her was focused. Her years of training and experience as a nurse were summed up in that moment. With one last glance at the flight attendant, who was standing beside her waiting for instructions, Maria pressed the defibrillator button. The first shock was intense, followed by a loud crackling noise from the machine. A sudden shudder ran through the man's body, and his muscles tensed as if trying to respond to the shock. The shock of the electricity was brutal, but necessary. Maria breathed deeply, waiting for the next sign of life. The defibrillator emitted a low beep, and the green light flashed. Analysis complete. Still, she didn't stop. She knew that resuscitation wasn't just about using a defibrillator. She had to do what she knew best: chest compressions. "Quickly," he said to the flight attendant. "We need to continue compressions. Help me keep the area clear." Without hesitation, the flight attendant stepped back a few steps, giving Maria space to work. Meanwhile, the passengers watching from their seats remained in tense silence, some with their hands over their mouths, others staring in despair. Maria took a breath, aligned her hands on the man's chest, and began chest compressions. Each pressure was firm and deep, the key to trying to restart his heart. 1, 2, 3. She counted softly as her hands sank into the man's chest with each thrust. The work was arduous, but she couldn't afford to lose focus. She knew what this moment meant. Not only an attempt to save a life, but also a race against time. With each compression, the sweat on her forehead increased. The muscles in her arms and shoulders were already beginning to feel tense from the exertion, but she couldn't stop. In her mind, her training guided her like a well-oiled clock. 30 compressions, then 2 breaths, she repeated in her head. She glanced at the patient, waiting for some sign. Suddenly, in a brief moment of uncertainty, the man began to make a faint sound, a snort. Maria paused for a second, but didn't allow herself to get her hopes up yet. She was used to the fact that, in these cases, signs of life could be merely an illusion, a momentary sign of the body struggling, but not yet winning. However, the sound repeated itself, this time louder. The man coughed, a slight but recognizable reflex indicating his body was responding to the stimulus. Maria leaned toward him, focusing her full attention on his eyes, which remained closed. The patient's chest also rose a little more than usual. His breathing, though fragile, became more stable. The improvement was minimal, but it was progress. "He's breathing," the flight attendant said, watching in amazement as the man began to cough weakly. Maria, still in shock from the improvement, gently ran her fingers over the patient's wrist, feeling for a pulse. The sensation was faint, but it was there. A faint pulse, a sign of hope. She took a deep breath, feeling her body, which had been pumped full of adrenaline, begin to relax a little. However, she couldn't allow herself to let her guard down. "Let's stabilize it," Maria said, her voice determined. "Stay calm, but we need to land quickly." The plane continued on course, but the situation had changed. The risk had passed, but the man had gained a little more time. Maria couldn't lose her rhythm. She continued monitoring his breathing, making sure there were no further complications. "How are you feeling?" the flight attendant asked as she approached Maria, wanting to know more about the patient's condition. "More stable, but still critical. We need to keep an eye on it." Meanwhile, the passengers watched intently from their seats, many with their hands on their hearts, unsure of what to expect. The nurse's focus offered them some hope, although uncertainty remained a shadow over them. The man, now breathing more deeply and slowly, seemed to be regaining control of his body. Maria crouched beside him to make sure he didn't slide off the makeshift stretcher. His eyes opened slowly, searching around in confusion, but unable to focus properly. "You're in a plane, sir," Maria said softly, trying to reassure him as she adjusted his headrest. She knew the patient was still far from out of danger, but at least the battle was being won. Maria leaned toward the patient, her breathing now calmer but still attentive. The man in front of her, his eyes half open, seemed to have regained a small shred of consciousness. For a second, he wasn't sure what he saw. His eyes moved slowly, searching for something, perhaps just something familiar. The cough that followed was weak, but strong enough for Maria to perceive as a good omen. Relatively calm, but still aware of the precariousness of the situation, Maria observed that her breathing was beginning to stabilize. The man, blinking more clearly, tried to focus his gaze on the ceiling, as if trying to adjust the world around him. However, he still looked disoriented, and his breathing remained shallow, although less rapid than before. "Are you feeling better?" Maria asked, her voice soft but firm, as she slightly adjusted his head to make him more comfortable. She tried to make the man's position as stable as possible, even though the situation was still uncertain. The man could barely muster a response, only a stifled murmur that sounded more like a sigh of relief than a coherent word. Maria didn't stop, her eyes still fixed on him as she watched the movement of his chest. "Don't worry, you're fine. The plane is taking steps to get you to the hospital. We just need to wait a little longer," Maria said, nodding to the flight attendant standing next to her, waiting for instructions. The flight attendant, relieved but still worried, watched as the situation gradually improved. The passengers, most of whom hadn't dared to approach, exchanged glances of uncertainty and surprise. Some still couldn't believe what was happening in front of them. A woman a few seats away breathed a sigh of relief. "Are you okay?" she asked, raising her voice gently. Maria looked up at her, trying to reassure her. "He's reacting, but we still need time. It's crucial that he maintain this breathing," Maria replied, still monitoring the man. As for the patient, his eyes slowly closed again. The flicker of consciousness was faint, but at least his pulse was now more consistent. The flight attendant, who had been watching his every movement, offered him a light blanket to cover the man, while some passengers began to murmur among themselves, commenting on the progress. Maria placed her hand on his chest again, measuring the rhythm of his breathing, a little heavier now, though still uneven. She took her cell phone out of her pocket, where she'd set an emergency landing alert. She needed the crew to be ready as soon as the plane touched down. Her job wasn't done yet, and she wasn't going to let the man faint again. "Are you going to keep him conscious?" the flight attendant asked, while Maria continued assessing the patient's condition. "We'll try, but the most important thing is that we don't leave him alone. We need to keep monitoring his breathing." "He's not out of danger yet," Maria replied, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Despite her exhaustion, her voice remained steady. Little by little, the people nearby moved away, giving them more space. Maria didn't dare relax yet. The man still couldn't communicate, but his breathing was slowly improving. She knew every second was crucial. The situation wasn't over, but at least the chances of saving him increased with every passing minute. "Help me with the monitor," Maria exclaimed to the flight attendant, who quickly nodded and began doing what she asked, while some passengers watched from a distance, realizing the seriousness of the situation. After several minutes of constant monitoring and appropriate maneuvers, the man finally opened his eyes fully, although his movements remained erratic. Maria, seeing the change, took a deep breath. A small step in the fight to save his life. His face still showed signs of fatigue and confusion, but at least he was back to life, something not many would have expected so quickly. "Can you hear me?" Maria asked, her voice soft but full of hope. The man coughed again, a much louder, though still hoarse sound. He was able to move his head slightly, which was enough to confirm that he was conscious, albeit fragile. "It's okay, he's coming back," Maria said, looking into his eyes with a small smile, knowing there was still a lot to do, but that she had gained precious time. The flight attendant approached, now with a more relaxed expression, although fatigue was still reflected on her face. "What's next?" he asked, waiting for instructions on what to do next. Maria, still holding the man's hand, continued to monitor his breathing. She knew that every change in his condition was critical. It was time to ensure the plane could land safely, so the patient could receive proper care. "We'll stabilize him here until we get to the airport. Let me know when we're close," Maria replied, still assessing the situation. The plane was now flying over a zone of light turbulence, but Maria no longer felt the knot in her stomach she'd felt at first. Although the fear never completely disappears in these cases, the certainty that she had done the right thing and that the man was responding allowed her to feel a little calmer. The silence that filled the cabin after the intense minutes of the emergency was palpable. The passengers, who had previously remained in a state of anxiety and tension, now breathed more easily. Some looked at each other, their eyes reflecting a mixture of disbelief and relief, as if they couldn't believe the nightmare was over. Others murmured, trying to process what had just happened. The murmurs gradually died away, replaced by a collective sigh. Maria, however, couldn't relax. Her body was exhausted, trembling from so much exertion. She'd had moments of doubt, of fear, but she'd acted on instinct, as she always had in emergency situations. However, now that the adrenaline was beginning to subside, the weight of fatigue fell upon her like a millstone. She allowed herself, for a brief moment, to rest her back against the aisle seat and close her eyes. Although there was still work to be done, she had accomplished the most important thing. She had saved a life. When she opened her eyes, she noticed some passengers looking at her gratefully. She offered them a small smile, even though she knew her exhaustion was evident. She had done her best, but she wasn't sure what else she could do at that moment. "Is he okay?" a woman asked in a trembling voice, approaching cautiously. Maria looked at her and nodded, though her mind remained alert, aware that the man could relapse at any moment. Yes, he's out of danger for now, but he still needs immediate medical attention. We're doing everything we can, Maria replied, trying hard to maintain her calm tone. Meanwhile, the flight attendant who had been assisting her approached to ask if she needed help gathering her gear. Thanks, but now I just need some space. We're almost done, Maria said, gathering her first aid kit with trembling hands. She was trying to organize it again, as if that would give her back control of the situation. Inside, a sense of relief was beginning to rise, but the responsibility remained the same. We'll take care of everything, don't worry, the flight attendant said with a genuine smile. She was grateful that Maria was so willing to help, although deep down she knew her help had been more than valuable. Maria allowed herself a small sigh of relief as she closed her first aid kit. She knew there was still a lot to do. The patient, although stable, wasn't completely out of danger. They had to wait for the plane to land, and there was still the process of transferring him to a hospital. But at least he was in better condition now than before. At that moment, the captain, who had been aware of the emergency from the beginning, approached Maria. His face was serious, but his gaze conveyed deep gratitude. "How is the patient?" the captain asked, his voice firm yet full of respect. Maria turned to him and nodded. "He's better, more stable. He's breathing on his own again, although he still needs medical attention. We're going to need an emergency landing and an ambulance waiting on the runway." The captain nodded quickly. "I've got it covered. We're close to landing. The ground crew is ready. Thank you for your valuable help, nurse. This plane wouldn't be the same without you." Maria could barely react. She wasn't used to receiving that kind of praise, and she didn't mean to. She had only acted on what she knew was right. "I was just doing my job," he said, humble, but not hiding the exhaustion in his voice. He realized he still hadn't processed what had just happened, but now he had only one goal in mind: making sure the patient received the best care possible. The captain nodded again and took out his logbook. "I'm going to need your name and some details for the incident report," he said, taking a pen and preparing to write. Maria paused for a moment, thinking about how to respond. She'd done the right thing, and that was all that mattered to her. She wasn't thinking about what it might mean for her, or whether anyone else might recognize what she'd done. She just wanted to make sure the patient was safe. "Maria Gomez," he finally answered, his voice still tired but clear. The captain quickly wrote her name, still looking at her with an expression of respect. "Thank you, Maria. We won't forget what you did today. I assure you that, once we land, everything will be handled with the utmost seriousness. What you've done goes beyond what was expected. This plane wouldn't have arrived safely without you." Maria didn't know what to say to that. Her gaze shifted toward the aisle, watching as the passengers began to relax a little more. The murmurs had almost completely ceased, and the looks on their faces were no longer filled with fear, but with silent gratitude. "I just did what I had to do. Now, we need to land," he said, and without waiting for a reply, he started walking toward his seat. There wasn't much left to do here. As the plane prepared to land, the tension in the cabin slowly dissolved. The flight attendant returned to her post, and the passengers began to return to their seats, some with smiles of relief, others still reeling from what had happened. Maria gathered her first aid kit and packed it in her bag, hoping the man would survive the emergency and receive proper treatment on the ground. But for now, all she could do was wait. The plane's cabin was already beginning to calm down after the crisis that had altered the course of the flight. The passengers, although still on high alert, had experienced palpable relief at seeing how the man's life had been saved, at least for now. The atmosphere in the aisle was eerily calm, a silence broken only by the whirring of the ventilation system and the gentle movements of the flight attendants ensuring everything was in order for the emergency landing. Maria sat in her seat, breathing deeply to calm the exhaustion building in her body. It had been a battle against time, but she had achieved what she had set out to do. However, the physical and emotional exhaustion still weighed heavily on her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, acknowledging the fatigue she felt, but at the same time, she knew there was still work to be done. The emergency landing was imminent, and the patient needed to be taken to a hospital immediately. It was then that the captain, who had been watching everything from his cabin, approached. The sound of his footsteps echoed in the empty cabin, and when he reached her, his gaze conveyed a mixture of seriousness and respect. "Maria," the captain said, in a tone that reflected the depth of what had just happened, "I want to thank you personally. What you did today isn't something many would be willing to do. You accomplished something incredible." Maria, still feeling the weight of what had happened, leaned forward slightly and offered him a weary smile. "It was nothing," he replied humbly. "I just did what I had to do." The captain stared at her, recognizing the humility in her words. He took out his logbook and began to quickly write something down. "I'm going to need your name and some details to complete the report," he said, looking up just to make sure she was ready to cooperate. "It's part of protocol, but I want you to know that everyone here today owes you a lot." Maria nodded, still somewhat bewildered by the magnitude of the situation. "My name is Maria Gomez," she said, receiving an appreciative look from the captain as he made notes in his notebook. "Maria, I want you to know that your intervention will be recorded with the utmost importance. You are in the aircraft logbook now, and the report I will write about you will be forwarded to the relevant authorities. This is not a simple anecdote. It is a testament to courage and professionalism." She didn't know how to respond to that. She was so tired that words seemed empty, but she felt a slight discomfort at receiving so much credit. She hadn't done it for the recognition. She had done it because it was her duty. However, what the captain told her made her feel that somehow her sacrifice had been understood and appreciated. The captain closed his notebook and put his pen in his jacket pocket, looking once more at Maria. "Thanks again, Maria. Now we need to make sure the patient is in the best possible hands. We're about to land, and I want you to know that the emergency team at the airport is ready to receive him." Maria nodded, her mind now focused on the next step. "Thank you, Captain. I'm sure the team on the ground can handle it. I just hope they manage to fully stabilize him." The captain gave her one last look before retreating back to the flight deck. Maria watched as the flight attendants began preparing the cabin for landing. Although the situation seemed to have improved, she knew the real fight for the patient's life began at the hospital. Her job here was almost done, but the task of keeping the patient alive and ensuring he received adequate medical care was not. The minutes passed slowly as the plane approached its destination. Nervousness gripped the passengers again, but this time, it was a different kind of nervousness. They were more relaxed than before. They knew everything had been done to save the man, but the uncertainty of what would come next remained. Finally, the seatbelt sign came on, and the passengers began preparing for landing. Maria, exhausted, fastened her seatbelt and took a deep breath, acknowledging that she had done her part. Her mission, for now, was over. The moment the plane touched down, a collective sigh ran through the cockpit. They knew the plane had landed safely, but the real work, saving a life, now fell to the emergency crew waiting on the tarmac. The plane taxied down the runway, and Maria watched from her window as the ambulance quickly approached, its lights on and ready to receive the patient. She knew she couldn't relax yet, that the work wasn't over yet, but at least she felt a little calmer, knowing the life of the man she had fought to save was now in the hands of trained professionals. The seatbelt sign remained lit until the plane gently touched down on the runway. A collective gasp ran through the cockpit when the captain announced over the PA system, "Dear passengers, we've made an emergency landing. I ask you to remain fastened and follow the crew's instructions." The cockpit lights flickered as the emergency exit lights activated. Through the window, Maria saw an ambulance pull up next to the plane, its flashing lights painting the fuselage red and blue, just a couple of meters away. The security barrier opened, and paramedics, wearing masks and gloves, rushed toward the gate. Maria stood slowly, leaning back in her seat to regain her balance. Cold sweat covered her forehead as her gaze scanned the aisle, watching everyone prepare for the next phase. A flight attendant approached her in a soft but firm voice. "Nurse, we need you to come to the front with us to coordinate with the paramedics." Maria nodded, fastening her seatbelt and following the crew. The murmur of the passengers turned into an expectant silence. Many looked at her in surprise, as if they still didn't fully understand that she had saved the life of a stranger. When she reached the front row, the aircraft doors were already open, and an aisle of stretchers and medical equipment extended toward the ambulance. A paramedic, visibly young but with a steady gaze, greeted her at the foot of the steps. "Nurse Gomez, can you tell us the patient's current condition?" Maria quickly described the situation in a low but clear voice. "He suffered a cardiac arrest mid-flight. He responded to the initial shock, resumed breathing on his own, and his pulse is stable, though weak. He requires oxygen and urgent transfer to a hospital." The paramedic nodded quickly, while another colleague placed the folding stretcher next to the door. Meanwhile, 2 more technicians prepared a portable oxygen tank and a heart monitor. Maria moved to the area of the small mounted platform, right where the ambulance was parked. The air on the tarmac, colder and quieter than the cabin, greeted them with a shock of temperatures. A passenger looked out the door, curious. "Is everything okay?" he asked in a shaky voice. Maria looked at him with a reassuring smile, although her tiredness was evident. "The gentleman is stable. The paramedics will now transport him to the hospital. Thank you for your understanding and cooperation." The passenger nodded, almost incredulous, and discreetly withdrew, giving the procedure some privacy. The flight attendant, standing next to Maria, offered a cloth to wipe away the sweat. "Nurse, thank you so much. I don't know what we would have done without you." Maria wiped her forehead and answered, "I hope the hospital finishes the job. It was a team effort." At that moment, one of the paramedics directed the loading operation. "Let's slide it in. Move aside a bit so the stretcher can fit through." The door was clear, and the stretcher, with the patient strapped in, moved forward slowly. Maria approached the man's shoulder and took his hand. "Sir, it's almost here. You're in safe hands now." The man, his eyes half closed, squeezed Maria's hand weakly, as if in thanks. Her breathing, marked by the oxygen, remained regular. It was then that the head paramedic, a dark-skinned man wearing protective glasses, addressed her. "Nurse Gomez, it's a pleasure to meet you. Do you mind if we bring your equipment up as well? We might need your expertise in the ambulance." Maria nodded, recognizing the importance of her role. "Sure. The entire first aid kit and defibrillator are here. Thanks for letting me help." The technicians took turns lifting the stretcher and placing it on the ambulance's level, while another adjusted the oxygen tank. The hum of the ambulance's engine mingled with the murmur of the crew and the beeping of the heart monitor. With great care, they slid the patient into the vehicle and closed the rear door. Before boarding herself, Maria turned to the captain, still visible at the plane door. "Captain, notify the appropriate authorities. The patient is with you." He raised his hand in greeting and shouted, "Understood, Maria. You've done an exceptional job." The ambulance started up, turned on its lights, and began to pull away down the runway, followed by a squadron of airline support vehicles. Maria saw the silhouette of the local hospital loom in the distance, barely visible under the dull morning sky. With one last glance, she closed the ambulance door behind her and took a deep breath, feeling the fresh air outside mix with the smell of disinfectant. She knew the man's race for his life was still ongoing, but at least she'd done her duty. Maria stepped into the ambulance with a firm step, though her body was still shaking from the exertion. The paramedics had placed the patient on the stretcher, secured him with straps, and connected him to oxygen. The monitor registered a steady pulse, but the tension remained. The driver, a deep-voiced man named Carlos, turned on the siren and started the car carefully. The roar of the engine mingled with the warning ultrasounds as they pulled off the road and onto the hospital access road. "Nurse Gomez," Carlos said in a calm voice, "can you confirm your most recent vital signs before you arrive?" Maria looked at the portable monitor in her hand. Blood pressure 100/65, heart rate 90 beats per minute, oxygen saturation 94%. She quickly wrote it down. Blood pressure 100/65, pulse 90, saturation 94%. It's still a little low, but stable. It's best to maintain it at 100% with an oxygen mask. The other paramedic, Sophia, leaned over the patient to adjust the nasal cannula. "Thank you, Maria. As soon as we arrive, the triage team will meet you." The wind battered the ambulance windows, and every turn made the truck sway slightly. Maria gripped the edge of the stretcher tightly to keep her balance. Beside her, the patient let out a deep sigh, as if regaining some strength. His face was pale, but there was a trace of color in his cheeks. "Sir, keep breathing slowly," Maria whispered, gently taking his hand. "We're almost there." He groaned, fluttered his eyelids, and nodded slightly. The sound of traffic on the main avenue accompanied the journey. Maria watched the traffic lights and calculated how much time they had left. Less than 3 minutes. "Carlos, be a little gentler on the next bend, please," Maria asked. "We don't want the cannula to move." "Understood," Carlos replied, braking carefully. Sophia looked at Maria with recognition. "Your composure was key to getting us this far," he said. "Without your initial intervention during the flight, our work would have been impossible." Maria shook her head at the compliment. "This is a team effort. We all play an important role here." At that moment, the buildings of the local hospital rose up on both sides of the road. A green-lit sign indicated the emergency room entrance. The ambulance turned and stopped in front of an automatic gate. 2 technicians in green uniforms rushed out with a stretcher, ready to receive the patient. "Triage team, critical patient," Carlos announced over the PA. "We had a cardiac arrest in the flight unit. He was kept in stable condition in the ambulance with oxygen and compressions." The back door burst open, and the technicians pushed the stretcher inside. Maria and Sophia ran after them, while Carlos followed with a first aid kit and defibrillator in his arms. Inside the emergency room corridor, the air smelled of disinfectant and heating ovens. Bright lights illuminated the stretchers lined up on either side. A triage nurse named Isabel was waiting for them with a cart of medications. "Nurse Gomez, thank you for coming so quickly. What's your evaluation?" Isabel asked, looking at the report Maria handed her. Maria looked at the stretcher straps and explained clearly: in-flight cardiorespiratory arrest, defibrillation and chest compressions. Patient with no known history of heart attack, blood pressure and saturation within acceptable range. Requires observation in a mobile ICU and a patent trachea. I recommend prophylactic intubation if respiratory distress is present. Isabel nodded and took notes on the tablet. "Perfect. Take him to trauma room 3. The intensive care team will be waiting there." As the staff moved the patient into the waiting room, Maria put away the first aid kit and said goodbye to Sophia. "Thank you for everything. I think this concludes my speech." Sophia patted him on the shoulder. "You're more than welcome anytime. Don't forget that." Maria left the emergency room, with the sound of machinery and medical voices behind her. She felt a lump in her throat. On one hand, pride in having fulfilled her duty. On the other, the certainty that her life would soon return to normal. She walked toward the side exit, where the ambulance was waiting to take her back to the airport. As she opened the door, the fresh air from outside caressed her face. Carlos greeted her from the booth. "Shall I take you back?" he asked, smiling. Maria nodded. "Please, I'd appreciate it. I need to rest for a moment before the next flight I'm assigned to." Carlos started the ambulance and started back. Maria leaned back in the seat, closed her eyes, and rested her head against the glass. She thought about the man they'd just saved, the team she'd met, and the fragility of life. Then she remembered she had to return to the airport to collect her things and catch a new flight. Meanwhile, her phone vibrated with a message from the airline. "Please report to Human Resources tomorrow to review the incident report." Maria opened her eyes and sighed. She knew that after the public acknowledgement, questions and perhaps consequences would follow. But for now, she focused on the sense of relief that the patient was in good hands. Maria walked firmly through the door of the Human Resources office, carrying the requested report and a folder containing her performance evaluations. The cold light from the fluorescent lamps contrasted with the heat of the day outside, and the silence in the hallway made her shiver. She lightly knocked on the glass door marked Human Resources Department, and a voice from inside invited her in. "Go ahead, Ms. Gomez," said HR manager Ms. Ramirez from her desk. Behind her, two other people, an in-house lawyer for the airline and the flight security supervisor, were watching her with serious expressions. Maria approached and introduced herself. "Thank you for seeing me. I've got the ambulance report and the paramedics' reports, just as you requested." Mrs. Ramirez nodded and looked up at the lawyer. "Please, Eduardo, seat us all in the adjoining conference room. We need to review the incident on Flight 342 in detail." Attorney Eduardo Hernandez gestured with a slight nod, and the security supervisor, Mr. Vargas, opened the door to a large room with an oval table and padded chairs. Maria placed her documents on the table and sat down, feeling the knot in her stomach grow. "Ms. Gomez," Mrs. Ramirez began, taking her folder, "we want to thank you for your courage and professionalism. Saving a life at cruising altitude is no easy task, and you demonstrated unwavering commitment." Mary bowed her head in respect. "Thank you. I only acted according to my training and my calling." Mr. Vargas intervened. "We have analyzed the cockpit recording, the passenger statements, and the crew report. We recognize that your intervention was key in stabilizing the patient before the emergency landing." Lawyer Eduardo took the floor. "However," he said, frowning, "there is a very clear policy regarding use of medical equipment by unauthorized personnel in the cabin. While your willingness to help is appreciated, you were not part of the airline's biomedical team." Maria felt a chill. "I understand the company policy," he replied softly, "but it was a matter of life or death." Mrs. Ramirez crossed her arms. "That's the point, Maria. Your actions saved a life, yes, but it could also have put other passengers at risk if something went wrong. By protocol, the crew can only perform basic first aid. Defibrillating and performing advanced compressions is beyond the scope of a passenger's duties, even for a passenger with a nursing degree." Maria closed her eyes for a second and took a deep breath. "So what's the scope of this meeting? An official acknowledgement or a warning?" The lawyer straightened and slid a sealed envelope toward her. "Both. We appreciate your courage and will include an honorable mention in your file. But we must also apply disciplinary measures in accordance with the internal regulations. You will find the official notification in this envelope." Maria took the envelope with slightly trembling hands, aware of what it might contain. Mrs. Ramirez added, "We want you to know that this decision isn't personal. It's the result of airline policies that we must all respect." Supervisor Vargas nodded. "The safety of our passengers is our priority. Your action was brave, but the company cannot encourage passengers to offer advanced medical procedures. That is reserved for certified airline personnel." Maria remained silent as she held the envelope. She tried not to show disbelief. "I understand," he finally said. "I accept whatever decisions you make." Mrs. Ramirez stood up, offering a hand. "We want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts. This meeting concludes here. If you have any additional questions, please contact me or Eduardo." Maria nodded, shook her hand, and gathered her documents. She felt a lump in her throat as she headed for the door. "Thank you very much," he murmured, leaving the room. Once outside, she took a deep breath and paused for a moment to open the envelope. Her heart pounded as she unfolded the sheet. She knew at that moment that, despite her gratitude, her fate at the airline was at stake. Maria held the envelope in both hands as she crossed the threshold of her front door. The envelope, made of thick paper and plain letterhead, had her name written on it in cold font. It had arrived that same afternoon, just after she'd returned from the hospital. Trembling, she placed it on the living room table, next to her handbag and coat, which were still hanging on the back of her head. "Are you home yet?" her sister Anna asked, peeking out from the kitchen. "You look tired." Maria nodded and sighed, while Anna put the pan aside to come closer. It's the letter from Human Resources," she said, taking a breath to calm her nerves. "I've been summoned to review the incident on the flight." Anna frowned and sat next to her on the couch. "And what does it say?" Maria carefully tore open the envelope, removed the sheet of paper, and held it up to the dim lamplight. The airline's official letterhead stood out at the top. She read aloud in a halting voice. "Mrs. Maria Gomez, following the incident on Flight 342 today, in which you exceeded the permitted duties of a passenger by performing advanced medical procedures on a third party, we are forced to terminate your contract with this airline, effective immediately. We appreciate your willingness to cooperate, but our operational policy is based on strict adherence to internal protocols. Sincerely, Human Resources Department, ****. The blade seemed to burn in her hands. Anna stared at it in disbelief. "Are you being fired?" "For overstepping your duties," he exclaimed, clutching his chest. Maria dropped the letter onto the table, feeling the torn edge with her fingers. "Yes," he murmured. "According to them, I wasn't authorized to use a defibrillator." An awkward silence fell over the room. Anna, furious, stood up and began pacing. "But how? You saved a life. You put your experience and your hands where no one else could." Maria looked up, avoiding her sister's eyes. "I know, but the airline. They say my actions could have jeopardized the company's reputation. They say the rules are the rules." Anna stopped her pacing and faced Maria with a harsh voice. "This is unfair. Are they going to fire you after everything you've done?" Maria stood up and placed her hands on the table. "Apparently, they've given me 3 days to sign a termination agreement or resign voluntarily." Anna clenched her fists. "You can't let them humiliate you like this. You have to fight." Maria felt a lump in her throat. She remembered the patient's weak pulse, his slow, steady breathing, the sweat on his forehead, and the rapid beating of her own heart. She wondered if all that effort had been worth it. "I don't know if," he began, but broke off. "I need time to think about it." Anna nodded, although her gaze was still burning. "In the meantime, don't sign anything, and get legal advice." Maria picked up the letter and put it in the folder with her nursing papers. As she did so, she noticed her hands were still shaking. She sat back down on the couch and exhaled sharply, trying to compose herself. "Thank you, Anna," he said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." Anna sat down next to her and hugged her tightly. "Never let them take away your dignity. And remember that you did the right thing." Maria nodded, closing her eyes for a moment. In the distance, the clock struck 8 at night. The dismissal slip lay on the table, unmoving. She knew that, despite the pain and indignation, she would have to make a decision. Maria stood motionless at the wooden table. In the center, the dismissal letter lay in tatters, torn into several uneven strips. Her hands, still trembling, rested on either side of the scraps of paper, as if she feared that moving would forever erase the evidence of the injustice. The black ink of the official typeface had run slightly in some fragments, a result of the tears that had fallen on the sheet before she tore it. A close-up captured the torn texture, jagged edges, exposed cellulose threads, and incomplete paragraphs. Stray fragments read like "exceeding duties, terminating your contract, effective immediately." Next to the envelope, piled up on one side, the larger pieces barely showed a "Sincerely, Human Resources Department," reminding her that behind that letterhead were implacable faces. Maria looked up, and the frame shifted to her face. Her eyes, reddened and shining with tears, reflected a mixture of pain and indignation. A tear slowly slid down her cheek and fell onto the torn letter. Her lips trembled as she tried to articulate something, but no words came out. "Maria," her sister Anna whispered, leaning down beside her. "Are you okay?" Maria looked down at the pieces of paper and, in a hoarse voice, replied, "No, I'm not okay, Anna. This can't be real." Anna sat on the edge of the table and put an arm around her shoulders, trying to comfort her. "You saved a life. This is an aberration." Maria closed her eyes, leaned her forehead against the wood, and exhaled deeply. Then, with a determined gesture, she picked up a larger piece of the letter and clasped it between her fingers. "Look at this," he said, holding up the fragment for Anna to see. "Advanced medical procedures, risk to the company. How can you so flippantly justify what I did?" Anna took the piece and read it aloud, in disbelief. "Exceeding passenger duties. This is absurd." Maria sat up a little, wiping her tears with the back of her hand, and spoke in a small voice filled with emotion. "All I did was save a life. I was there, not them." The captain admitted it. The paramedics, the passengers, they all saw it. But they care more about the protocol than the person. Anna gently banged her fist on the table, as if she wanted to strike injustice itself. "You have to fight, Maria. You can't let yourself be dragged down for following your calling." Maria looked away from the torn letter and fixed her eyes on her sisters. "I know, but right now I just feel angry and sad. I don't know where to start." Anna stood up with determination and went to the shelf, where she kept a notebook and a pen. "You start with this," he handed them to her. "Write down what you feel, your arguments, what happened step by step. Then we'll review it together and seek support. You're not alone in this." Maria took the notebook, clutching it like a lifeline, and placed the tip of the pen on the first blank page. She closed her eyes for a moment, inhaled deeply, and in her mind reviewed every moment on board the plane. The passenger's fall, the defibrillator, the compressions, the landing, the ambulance. When she finally opened her eyes, her expression had changed. No longer just pain, but determination. With her other hand, she picked up a scrap of paper and slipped it into the back of her notebook, a tangible reminder of what was at stake. "Let's begin," he said, his voice firm. "I'm going to document everything, dates, testimonies, internal policies, and then I'll demand that they rectify this injustice." Anna smiled, relieved to see the same fire in her sister's eyes. "That's it, Maria. Together we'll make it." Maria put her pen to the paper and, for the first time since she received the news, began to write. Maria opened her front door gently, as if afraid to break the silence that reigned in the living room. The humidifier was wheezing in the corner, releasing a cloud of steam onto the carpet. An electric diffuser emitted a soft lavender scent, but as she crossed the threshold, the aroma wasn't enough to dispel the feeling of emptiness. She took off her jacket and hung it on the coat rack. The echo of her footsteps resonated faintly in the hallway. "Anna," he whispered. "I'm home now." There was no immediate response. She moved forward slowly, observing the dimness barely broken by the floor lamp next to the sofa. On the coffee table, a row of photo frames told the family story. A beach wedding, Anna's graduation, the newborn niece's first birthday, an unfinished portrait of both sisters as children, with wet paint on their hands. Each photograph seemed to look at her with compassion. "I'm here," Anna finally answered, looking up from the armchair. She had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders and was holding a steaming cup of green tea. Her gaze was warm, but filled with concern. Maria approached and sat at the other end of the sofa. Silence fell between them again, broken only by the faint crackling of freshly poured coffee on the side table. "I don't know how to explain it to you," Maria began, looking down. "It was all so sudden. Getting that letter and knowing my career could be over because of something I did to save someone." Anna sighed and put the cup on the coaster. "I know it hurt, but let's look at these photos," he said, gesturing broadly at the frames. "This is what really matters. The family, the years of work, your dedication." Maria gave a small, sad smile. She leaned across the table and picked up her nursing graduation portrait, where she was wearing a cap and gown, her eyes shining with pride. "Almost 10 years ago, it seemed like such a different world," he murmured. Anna bent down and picked up another photo. It was from her best friend's bachelorette party, where Maria had treated a dizzy spell without a second thought. "It was always you, Maria. Wherever there's an emergency, you're there. You proved it then, and you did it again on the flight," Anna stated firmly. A slight tremor ran through Maria's hand as she touched the photo frame. "I know, but the airline now calls it overstepping your duties." He sighed. "I'm worried about what it says in my file if someone else sees it." Anna approached and took both photographs in her hands. "Then be prepared to show them your whole story, from the first day you started as a nurse until now. Don't let them erase everything you've done for them and others." Maria looked up and found in her sister's eyes the same fire that had driven her to study nursing. A flash of determination pierced the melancholy. "Tomorrow I'll start compiling my entire resume. Degrees, courses, letters of recommendation," she announced. "I'm going to prove that I'm not a newcomer, that I've been saving lives and assisting in emergencies for 10 years. Anna nodded proudly and placed the photos back in their place with reverential care. "That's the attitude, and you won't do it alone. I'll go with you to HR if you need me." Maria closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and leaned back against the sofa. The living room, although quiet, seemed more inviting with the presence of family photographs. A dim light filtered through the curtain, projecting silhouettes of leaves on the wall. "Thanks, Anna. I think I'll be able to sleep a little better tomorrow," he said, regaining a semblance of calm. The younger sister smiled and handed her the cup of tea. Maria accepted it gratefully, brought the rim to her lip, and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "Let's redistribute our energy for the upcoming fight," Anna suggested. "Rest now." Maria nodded and placed her cup on the coaster, closing her eyes as the sheet gently vibrated with the gentle hum of the humidifier. Outside, the streetlights flickered like silent witnesses. Inside, on the table, the family photographs remained untouched, reminding her of where she came from and where she was meant to go. Maria woke up early, still reeling from the tension of the past few days. She headed to the desk in the living room, where Anna had organized a large folder with colored dividers. On top of the folder, A lace tablecloth held several cups of freshly brewed coffee. She grabbed one and sat down in front of the computer, ready to start her day's revisions. Ready for a trip back in time? Anna joked, coming in with another cup and sitting next to her. Absolutely, Maria replied, taking a sip. I need to know what evidence I have to defend myself. She opened the first envelope, which contained her bachelor's degree in nursing, issued by Central University 10 years ago. The gold letters gleamed in the lamp's reflection. Next, she took out several diplomas from specialized courses: intensive care, cardiovascular emergencies, advanced life support. Each certificate bore the seal and signature of renowned medical institutions. Look at this, Maria said, showing Anna the advanced life support certificate. Here's the official certification for defibrillation and chest compressions. I feel almost comforted looking at it, she added with a wry smile. Anna nodded proudly. That's your best argument. No one can question your training. Maria placed the documents on the table and opened a file where she kept letters of recommendation from former shift supervisors and colleagues. She took out the first letter, written by the emergency room supervisor at San Miguel Hospital. Nurse Maria Gomez has demonstrated professionalism, a quick response, and empathy with her patients on every shift. Her skills in cardiac emergencies have saved countless lives. Phew, Maria murmured. That speaks for itself. Carefully, she turned to the next envelope. There were awards and honorable mentions from her former Children's Health Center, where she received the Young Nurse of the Year award. I didn't know you still had this, Anna said, amazed. I save it for moments like this, Maria replied. My journey didn't begin on that plane. It began a long time ago. Next, he took out a leather notebook where he recorded critical cases he had treated. With firm handwriting and precise dates, he reviewed notes on a child with severe asthma, an elderly woman with internal bleeding, and a traffic accident with multiple victims. Each entry described the maneuvers performed, the results, and, occasionally, subsequent thanks from family members. Anna flipped through the notebook. Can you imagine how strong your case will be when we present all this? He asked excitedly. Maria gave a nervous laugh. I hope HR appreciates it, although I doubt they'll be that reasonable. He then decided to call his former ICU colleague, Nurse Laura, to ask for an update. He dialed the number and waited for her to answer. Hi, Laura, it's Maria. Sorry for the time, but I need a huge favor. Maria, tell me, what's going on? Laura replied, her voice choked with surprise. I was fired for saving a life on a plane, he explained, on the verge of tears. I want to give you a testimonial about my career, and if you can, a note confirming your experience working with me. Of course, Laura exclaimed. In a couple of hours, you'll have my letter, and even a short video if you need it. Maria hung up, relieved. She put the notebook back in the folder and organized the documents in chronological order. Degrees, courses, letters of recommendation, awards, and critical case notes. This is an arsenal, Anna said, amazed. More than enough to keep you from being thrown out just like that. Maria took a deep breath and looked at the folder full of papers that symbolized a decade of dedication. Now all that's left is to prepare a presentation-style dossier, with scanned copies and a clear table of contents, he said. I'll scan everything tomorrow. Anna got up to connect the multi-function scanner. Let's go, operations captain. Don't let this record go unnoticed. Maria smiled for the first time in days. As she watched Anna scan the first page, she thought about all those years of hard work, endless shifts, emergencies, and saved lives. All of that was part of her identity, and now it was going to be her best defense. Thank you for being with me, he whispered. Always, Anna replied, handing her the first scanned PDF. We'll fix it together. Maria looked at the screen where her newly digitized diploma appeared. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and felt whole again. Maria closed the folder full of documents and, with a look of determination, turned on her laptop. The soft whir of the computer's fan sounded like a war anthem. Her pulse quickened as she saw the illuminated screen. Anna, who was sorting the scanned diplomas into a digital folder, looked up and asked softly, "Ready for the next phase, Captain?" "More than ready," Maria replied, raising an eyebrow. "I'm sick of getting fired for doing the right thing." With trembling fingers, she opened her browser and typed into the search bar, "Can I sue an airline for wrongful termination?" Dozens of results appeared. Labor law forums, lawyer queries, articles from flight attendant and nurses' unions. Maria took a deep breath, fighting the lump of indignation rising in her throat. "Look, Anna," she said, pointing to the first tab. "This is a law firm specializing in wrongful cause dismissals. We could schedule a virtual appointment." Anna took a sip of tea and nodded vigorously. "Go for it. In the meantime, I'll look up examples of petitions online." Maria clicked on a free legal advice portal. A form asked her to describe her case. With a steady hand, she began to type. "My name is Maria Gomez, a registered nurse with 10 years of experience. On July 21st, 2025, on Aerotzer's Flight 342, I saved the life of a passenger in cardiac arrest using my knowledge and equipment. However, the airline terminated me for exceeding my duties. I am seeking advice on how to proceed legally and get my job back." Although the text was born out of anger, Maria carefully revised it to ensure it was clear and concise. She clicked Send Inquiry and waited for the confirmation. "Thank you, you will receive a response from a lawyer shortly," appeared on the screen. "Good," he murmured. "Now for the public request." She searched for Create a Petition on change.org and followed the steps to start a campaign titled Reinstatement of Maria Gomez. Saving lives is not a crime. She uploaded a brief description of the events, including a blurry photo of the ambulance on the tarmac, with the paramedic's permission, and a link to the medical report certifying the patient's stabilization. "What do you think of the introductory text?" she asked Anna, who was reading from the second screen. Anna corrected some commas and added a paragraph requesting the support of all the passengers who had witnessed the event. "Done," Anna said. "I'll sign the first one." Maria clicked Start Petition. A counter showed 0 signatures so far. "Let's give it a boost," Anna suggested. "I'll go to your social media profile and share it with a quick message." Maria opened her Facebook page and wrote, "Today I'm launching this petition to demand my reinstatement after being fired for saving a life mid-flight. If you believe that solidarity and dedication should be rewarded, not punished, please join us by signing it." She clicked Share, and the post crossed her feed. A few seconds later, the notification icon started flashing. 5 people signed your petition." "Look at that!" Maria exclaimed with a flicker of hope. In 30 seconds, 5 signatures. Meanwhile, on the legal form, there was an automated response. "An attorney will review your case and contact you within the next 24 hours. "At least I have some support," he commented. "But I can't just sit idly by." She then searched for nurses' unions' complaints and found the website of the College of Nursing in her region. She called the helpline and, after a brief answering machine, a friendly voice answered. "Nursing Association, this is Laura." "Hi, Laura," said Maria. "This is Maria Gomez, a member of the board since 2015. I was fired for intervening in a cardiac arrest on an airplane. What do you recommend?" "Of course, we'll guide you. The Professional Defense Committee meets tomorrow. Send a copy of the dismissal letter and your file to this email. We'll review your case." Maria hung up, feeling that, little by little, she wasn't alone. "Anna, the nursing school supports me." She smiled. "I'm meeting with them tomorrow." Anna closed the digital document folder and gave him a quick hug. "This is serious. It's okay to be outraged. Now is the time to act with your head and heart." Maria nodded, looking at the screen where the signature counter was already showing 42 signatures in 10 minutes. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, letting the adrenaline subside. Then she opened another tab and searched for unfair dismissal news, iterating her message and preparing to tweet a thread explaining her story. At that moment, an email notification announced the arrival of a message. Request received, Diaz and Associates Law Firm. We will respond before 6 p.m. Good, Maria said firmly. The war has begun. Maria reopened the change.org tab and stared at the incomplete form, like a sketch of a mural still waiting to be colored. Beside her, Anna held her phone, checking the notifications that were already starting to arrive. Okay, we have a good title, but we need a powerful description, Anna commented, walking over and pointing at the text box. Something that explains the case in a few lines and touches people's hearts. Maria nodded and leaned over the keyboard. On July 21st, on Aerotzer's Flight 342, Nurse Maria Gomez saved the life of a passenger after a cardiac arrest. Despite acting with full qualifications and training, the airline fired her for exceeding her duties. We demand Maria's immediate reinstatement, because saving lives should not be a crime. Perfect, Anna approved. Now, we need to choose a representative photo. Do you have one? Maria searched her folder of images and located one taken inside the ambulance, her hands holding the defibrillator next to the monitor, with the patient breathing through a mask. She lifted it onto the platform. This conveys urgency and courage, he said. Anna adjusted the crop to center Maria's hands and the pulse on the monitor. Then, together, they chose a category, labor rights and health and safety, so the petition would appear in both sections. Deadline? Anna asked. Maria hesitated for a second and wrote, Campaign end, August 21st, 2025. A month to gather support before the hearing with the College of Nursing. That way people have time, and we can submit the signatures when we meet, Maria explained. Once this was done, they went to the goal and progress section. Anna suggested, we could set an initial goal of 5,000 signatures. That sounds ambitious but achievable. Yes, Maria replied. It would also help raise awareness of the case on social media. They typed 5,000 and checked the box to allow periodic updates for signers. Anna wrote a thank you message. Thank you for supporting Maria Gomez's reinstatement. Each signature is another step toward showing that saving lives deserves recognition, not punishment. Share this petition with your friends and family. Maria read the preview one last time. All set, he said, with a decisive click. Post petition. The page reloaded, showing a counter. 0 of 5,000 signatures. Anna immediately grabbed her smartphone and sent the link to the nursing school's WhatsApp group. Girls, I need your support and spread the word, she wrote. Minutes later, the first notifications appeared. Maria Gomez started a petition. 5 people signed your petition. 10 people signed your petition. Maria and Anna looked at each other, excited. Look how it's going up, exclaimed Maria. In less than 5 minutes, we've reached 20 signatures. Great! Now let's tweet it, Anna suggested. They opened Twitter and wrote a thread. /today we are starting this petition to demand the reinstatement of #Maria Gomez, a nurse fired after saving a life on a flight. /safeguarding passenger safety is our priority, and her actions confirm this. 3/ saving lives is not a crime. Sign and share. Link. As soon as they posted it, the interactions began. Retweets, likes, supportive comments. Maria smiled. It's incredible to see the solidarity. This is going to grow very quickly. At that moment, Anna's cell phone vibrated with a voice message from her friend Pilar, a journalist. Hi Anna, I heard your story. Join me on Instagram Live this afternoon. We can reach a wider audience. Anna reproduced it for Maria. Pilar says she would do a 15-minute live broadcast to spread the petition. Maria nodded determinedly. I accept. The more noise, the better. Let's let him know he's counting on me. Anna replied to the message and then returned her attention to the screen, where the counter already showed 84 signatures. Almost 100, she said, delighted. This is going great. Maria allowed herself a brief sigh of relief and closed her eyes for a moment. Thank you, Anna. Without you, I couldn't. Anna interrupted her with a hug. We'll do it together. Tomorrow we'll contact the flight passengers. Perhaps some of them would like to testify. Maria opened her eyes, her gaze shining. Good idea. We can ask the airline for the passenger list so we can contact them. Although I doubt it. It's better to ask the ones we already know. Anna nodded and added, we can send them a direct message on social media. Many of them have already written to us thanking us for your efforts. Maria smiled, and as she looked at the counter that registered 132 signatures in just 10 minutes, she knew her fight had truly begun. Maria stared open-mouthed at the computer screen as the number on the signature counter climbed at an unexpected rate. Barely 30 minutes had passed since they posted the petition, and they were already approaching 500 signatures. Anna, sitting next to her, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Look, Maria, we're already 487, Anna exclaimed, pointing with the cursor. And we just received another batch of 50 signatures at once. Maria reached out and stroked the screen. I can't believe it. This is much faster than I imagined, he replied, his voice faint. People from all over the country, even some from abroad, are signing. Messages of gratitude and solidarity began to pour in the comments section. One of the first read, as a nurse, I deeply admire you. Thank you for your courage. Signed from Puerto Rico. Another, from an anonymous passenger on the flight. I was there. Maria, you don't know how much we owe you. Sign it. That comment came from the passenger next to me. Maria said, her voice breaking. Do you want to answer him? Anna asked, already typing. Maria nodded and wrote delicately. Thank you so much for your support and for being there. It was an honor to help. He hit send and watched as the comment received several likes within seconds. Outside, Anna checked her phone notifications and let out a small cry of excitement. 1,000 signatures. 100 people have shared it on Facebook. Maria sat up urgently, leaning towards the screen. 1,000? Over what period of time? In just an hour and a quarter, Anna replied. This is going to become a trend. Suddenly, the living room landline rang. It was Pilar, Anna's journalist friend. Hi, ladies. I just wanted to let you know that my editor wants to publish an article this afternoon about your case, Maria. Can I send you the request so you can link to it and recommend it? Yes, please, Maria replied, feeling a thrill of excitement. The more word gets out, the more we'll have in our favor. Great, Pilar said. I'll call you in a few minutes with the draft. Good luck. The call hung up, and Anna looked at the counter again. There are already 1,845 signatures. This is getting out of hand, in the best possible way. Maria placed her hands on the back of the sofa, taking a deep breath. I need to handle this calmly, he said. I don't want any messages to slip through the net or any requests to go unanswered. Anna nodded and began organizing her browser tabs. I'm going to create folders to categorize comments, passengers, nursing colleagues, media, and other. This way, we can respond in a more organized manner. Maria smiled at her sister's methodical proposal. Excellent idea. And I'm going to prepare a sample message for each group. Meanwhile, the counter surpassed 2,300 signatures. A small trending badge appeared next to the petition link, indicating it was reaching a high level of interest on the platform. Look at that badge, Anna exclaimed. Trending in Spain. Maria felt a lurch in her stomach, a mixture of pride and responsibility. This means more people outside our circle will come in and sign. We have to keep the campaign alive with updates. We could post a short video of you thanking them and explaining the next steps, Anna suggested. Maria nodded. Record something for me right now. Briefly explain what happened and why we need your support. Anna turned on her laptop's camera and, after some improvised lighting adjustments, began recording. Maria took a deep breath. Hello, everyone, she began in a firm voice. Thank you for signing and sharing the petition. I'm overwhelmed by your support. My dismissal can't overshadow what truly matters, saving lives. Every signature shows that together we can change this injustice. I will continue to fight for my reinstatement and for recognition of all the professionals who risk everything to help. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. When he finished, he clicked Stop Recording and reviewed the video with Anna. Perfect, Anna said. I'll upload it to Instagram and Facebook right now. The post began receiving encouraging comments within seconds, and the signature count climbed toward 3,000. Maria leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes for a second to process it. I don't know whether to go to sleep or start crying from emotion, he murmured. Do both, Anna joked. But first, let's prepare the testimonials. I'm going to send a message to those passengers who signed and commented. Maria opened the list of signers, looked for the names that matched those she had recognized in the comments, and sent them a private message. Hi, I'm Maria Gomez. Thank you for signing. Could you confirm your testimony so I can include it in our campaign and with the College of Nursing? Within minutes, he began receiving affirmative responses, offering to record a short audio recording or send a written document. We have the material, Maria said with renewed enthusiasm. Now it's time to consolidate all of this into supporting evidence for anyone who needs it. The counter, unstoppable, already reached 3,742 signatures. The trending badge flashed at the top of the page. Maria and Anna sat in front of the computer, their hearts racing, ready to closely follow the digital press's progress on their campaign. Anna first navigated to Salud Hoy, one of the most widely read medical websites in the country, and read aloud. Look, Maria. Nurse fired after saving passenger mid-flight sparks wave of solidarity, he commented, pointing at the headline with the cursor. Maria brought her phone closer, and next to the text, a photo of the ambulance on the tarmac appeared, just as they had shared it in the petition. Anna immediately opened another tab on Noticias 24. Here it says Controversy at Aerotours. Hero or Violator? He read. The subtitle says, The Maria Gomez case confronts security protocols and professional ethics. Maria frowned. Talking about protocols seems ironic to me, she whispered, as she typed a comment on the same news story. Protocols save flights, but vocation saves lives. Hashtag reincorporation Mariagame. A few seconds later, a digital like lit up the screen. Anna smiled. That's moving fast. I'm going to airlines today now. On that portal, a bold banner proclaimed, Hero unjustly dismissed. The price of bravery. Clicking on it revealed an opinion piece in which several experts invited debate on the extent to which airlines should relax their emergency regulations. Maria read aloud a paragraph. Article 35 of the IATA regulations recommends voluntary cooperation. This is gold for our argument, he said. I'm going to save this page as a PDF. Anna, looking at her phone, commented, Pilar, the journalist, just sent me a WhatsApp message. The article is on the front page of El Correo de la Region's website. I'm forwarding it to you. Maria replied to the message. Thanks, Pilar. Could you send me the link so I can share it with the petition? Meanwhile, in another browser window, a promoted tweet appeared. Hashtag reincorporation Mariagame is now trending. The healthcare community is asking that saving a life not be grounds for dismissal. Maria exhaled with a mixture of joy and tiredness. "We're on Twitter trends, Anna." "I can't believe it." Anna looked at her proudly and urged her. "Share the link to that tweet on your LinkedIn. Your professional contacts will understand what it's all about." Maria copied the link and pasted it into a post. "Proud to see how the community comes together to demand justice. Hashtag saving lives is not a crime." At that moment, the landline rang again. It was the office of a financial newspaper. "Good afternoon. Shall we speak with Nurse Maria Gomez? We want to know the financial impact this controversy could have on the airline," a polite voice asked. Maria, somewhat surprised, replied, "Sure, I can participate live or in writing, whenever you need me." He hung up and looked at Anna. "Now they want to talk about numbers. This is already a state case." Anna, without missing a beat, opened a spreadsheet that had recorded the hourly growth in signatures. With the graph on screen, she added, "Look at this curve, from 500 to 5,000 signatures in 8 hours. There's news here, not just headlines." Maria took the external hard drive and saved a backup of everything she had collected. "I'm going to send it to the College of Nursing and the law firm. Let them see the magnitude of the support." Suddenly, a message arrived from Laura, her former ICU colleague. "Maria, your story was published in the San Miguel Hospital digital newsletter. I'm attaching the link. It's on the front page." Maria opened the link and read, "Example of dedication. How a colleague showed courage above and beyond her duties by saving a life in flight. Interview and analysis." "This is great," he said, his voice cracking. "Every link adds authority." Anna replied, "Today we have to make an Instagram thread with screenshots of all these portals and links." Maria nodded, moved by the media's reaction. "Thank you, Anna. Without you I wouldn't be able to keep up with so much management." The petition counter read 8,342 signatures, and the trending badge blinked proudly. Outside, dusk was fading, but in her living room, the light from the screens illuminated a hopeful future. Maria settled in front of her laptop camera, feeling the tingle of nerves mixed with a hint of excitement. Anna had set up a small set next to the sofa. A neutral background, warm lamplight, and the folder of documents neatly stacked on a side table. The Instagram Live link was already live, and Pilar, the journalist, appeared on screen, waving enthusiastically. "Good afternoon, everyone. We're live with Nurse Maria Gomez, the protagonist of a wave of solidarity following her unjustified dismissal for saving a passenger's life mid-flight." "Hi, Maria. Tell us about your experience," said Pilar, adjusting the microphone. Maria smiled warmly, took a deep breath, and waved to the 100 or so viewers already cheering her on in the chat. "Hi, Pilar. Thanks for inviting me, and thank you all for being here. For those joining now, can you briefly summarize what happened?" Pilar asked, showing the signature counter on the screen, which had surpassed 8,500. "Of course. On July 21st, on Aerotzer's Flight 342, a passenger suffered a cardiac arrest. I acted immediately, using my diploma and my team, and managed to revive him. Despite this, the airline fired me for exceeding my duties. This Change.org petition seeks my reinstatement and professional recognition." In the chat, comments began to flow. At Infirmary Anna, "You're a role model, Maria." At Viagra Fellas, "I was in that seat. Thank you so much." At Salute Global, "This is a case of labor rights and ethics." Anna, sitting to one side, gave a thumbs up when she saw the messages. Pilar continued, "I see there are already witness testimonies in the chat. Are you getting support from those who were on the flight?" Maria nodded and lifted her cell phone to show a couple of direct messages. "Yes, I've received several. For example, Juan, who was accompanying the sick man in seat 15B, wrote to me, saying he wouldn't have lasted 5 minutes without my intervention. Nursing colleagues from other countries are also sharing best practices. Incredible! Pilar interrupted with admiration. There are so many people paying attention to this. How does it feel to see your case transcending borders? Maria blushed slightly, excited and grateful. I never imagined the extent of my situation. I think it shows how essential solidarity is and the courage of those who risk everything to help. Pilar nodded and turned the camera slightly to include Ana. Ana is also with us. How has your support been from the beginning? Ana leaned forward. It's been a team effort. I'm helping manage the petition, responding to messages and documenting testimonies. But we owe it all to Maria and her courage. The chat filled with hearts and applause emojis. Pilar turned her attention back to Maria. To conclude, what steps will you take now that all this has gained momentum? Maria took a breath and enumerated with determination. Tomorrow I'm meeting with the College of Nursing to present all the documentation and testimonies. Then, next week, I have an appointment with a law firm to evaluate legal action. At the same time, we'll continue collecting more signatures and testimonies from passengers and colleagues, and we'll prepare a dossier for Aerotours management. A follower asked in the chat, @jurista_Alejandro, are you considering suing for emotional damages? Maria replied calmly, it's something we'll evaluate with the lawyers. My priority now is the reinstatement and public recognition of the work of healthcare professionals, but we haven't ruled out any avenue to protect my rights. Pilar smiled at the camera. Thank you, Maria and Ana, for sharing this space and clarifying all our doubts. This goes beyond a dismissal. It's a call to value ethics and vocation. Before finishing, Maria turned to the camera with a firm voice. Thank you all for your support. Every signature and every message counts. If you believe in justice and solidarity, keep sharing. See you soon. The broadcast ended with a heartfelt virtual round of applause that flooded the screen with hearts and encouraging comments. Maria signed off, exhaled deeply, and turned to Ana. This has been intense but necessary. Ana handed him a handkerchief and nodded. We've done well. Tomorrow, an important step will come. We'll see if a congressman officially mentions your case. Maria smiled hopefully, thinking about the next phase of her struggle. Maria was checking her phone with a steaming cup of coffee in her hand when Ana entered the living room with a look of astonishment. Maria, you have to see this, Ana exclaimed. A congressman just published something about your case. Maria put her cup on the coffee table and picked up her phone. Ana showed her the screen. A tweet from the official account of Congressman Ricardo Herrera, head of the House Public Health Committee. At Congresswoman Herrera, a record of courage and dedication. Today we support the petition for the reinstatement of Nurse Maria Gomez, who was fired after saving a life at 30,000 feet. Hashtag saving lives is not a crime. The tweet, accompanied by a link to the change.org petition, had already racked up hundreds of likes and retweets. Beneath it, several users responded with messages of support and gratitude. Look at the wave of responses, Ana said, scrolling through the comments. Adivalapes says, a politician who defends the courage of his citizens, bravo. And Piloto Luis says, this is an act of justice. Maria deserves her position back. Maria felt a lump of emotion in her throat. She never would have imagined her case would end up in a political forum. This changes everything, he whispered. An official endorsement from a congressman elevates our case to another level. Ana opened another browser tab to check the congressman's Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. Sure enough, the same message appeared on both platforms, with extensive comments and thousands of shares. We need to respond, thank him, Ana suggested. I'm going to write a private message on LinkedIn. Maria nodded and watched her sister type. Dear Congressman Herrera, thank you for supporting my petition and for recognizing the value of healthcare professionals. This support honors us and brings us closer to a fair solution. Sincerely, Maria Gomez. Sent, Ana announced. Now, let's wait for your public or private response. Meanwhile, the news immediately began circulating in the nursing group's WhatsApp chat. Several colleagues commented on the historic step. "I've never seen such an impact from a single tweet," wrote at Infirmer_Carmen. "This could pressure the airline to rectify," noted at Infirmero Jorge. Maria read the messages with gratitude, but with her mind already occupied with the next step. If a congressman mentions it, a formal invitation from his office will soon arrive, he said. Perhaps they'll call me for a work meeting or a public event. At that moment, the landline rang. Maria approached and answered. "Maria Gomez?" A clear, male voice asked on the other end of the line. "This is Laura Mendoza, Chief of Staff to Congressman Herrera. First, let me congratulate you on your courage and thank you for the opportunity to support you. The Congressman would like to meet with you next Wednesday at the Capitol building to discuss potential legislative initiatives that recognize and protect healthcare professionals in emergency situations." Maria felt her heart skip a beat. "Thank you very much," she replied in a shaky but firm voice. "It would be an honor. Could you tell me the time and details of the appointment?" "Of course," Laura Mendoza continued. "The meeting will be at 10 a.m., room 412 of the East Wing. We will send you a formal invitation by email with the agenda. We would also appreciate it if you could bring the documentation you've collected, files, testimonies, and the background that will guarantee the solidity of the proposal." Maria nodded, although Laura couldn't see her. "Understood. I'll bring the entire dossier. I'm very grateful for this opportunity. We'll be in touch." Laura said goodbye. "Good afternoon, Nurse Gomez." Maria hung up and sat back down next to Ana, her eyes lit with hope. "Did you hear that?" he asked, a smile peeking through his fatigue. "A meeting with a congressman to push for legislative change." Ana hugged her. "This is incredible. You've turned an injustice into a movement of solidarity, and now into an opportunity to protect others." Maria leaned back on the sofa and closed her eyes for a moment, repeating Laura Mendoza's words in her mind. She opened the folder they'd been filling with documents and flipped through the first few pages. "Tomorrow I need to go over everything. Witness testimonies, certifications, protocol analyses, every detail." Ana leaned over and patted him on the shoulder. "We'll do it together. This is a major step forward. Now, let's prepare for the event and continue adding voices." Maria nodded, letting her excitement transform into determination. A congressman had recognized her. The next step would take her to even higher ground. Maria wakes up to the buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. The screen glows with an urgent message. With hands still shaking from the excitement of the previous call, she sits up and opens the message. From White House Correspondence Office to Ms. Maria Gomez. Subject: Official Invitation. Dear Ms. Gomez, the President of the United States wishes to express his personal appreciation for your courage and professionalism. It will be an honor to have you with us for a private meeting at the White House, in the Oval Office, next Monday at 11 a.m. Your testimony will contribute to the development of policies that protect healthcare professionals in emergency situations. Please RSVP. Sincerely, Mary Stanton, Executive Assistant to the President. Maria reads aloud, almost in disbelief. A private meeting at the White House. Can you imagine, Ana? Her sister, who was finishing organizing the scanned documents in the living room, rushes in. Did you see it? Is it real? Maria shows her the laptop screen. Oval Office. Ana reviews the email with admiration and a touch of disbelief. This is a historic opportunity. Should we confirm right now? Maria clicks RSVP and writes a brief response message. Thank you very much for the invitation. I confirm my presence on Monday at 11 a.m. in the Oval Office. Sincerely, Maria Gomez. As she sends the email, her mind races. She imagines the moment. Walking through the marble halls, the presidential portraits, the sensation of stepping onto a floor so steeped in history. She closes her eyes for a moment and remembers the tension as she resuscitates the passenger. Tension that now turns to hope. California, Washington, D.C., special flight. Everything needs to be organized, she murmurs. I have to review the route, prepare my executive folder, the copies for the president, get the audio and paper testimonies ready. Anna closes her laptop and looks at her proudly. I'll call HR tomorrow to request the leave. You have to be prepared. Wardrobe, press releases, a script for what you're going to say. Maria nods and opens her address book. I'll call the embassy to arrange the visa and coordinate the transfer in an official car. I'll also have to rehearse my speech. I want to be clear and brief, but convey the urgency of recognizing nurses in emergencies. Anna enthusiastically joins in the planning. Record a draft of your speech. I'll help you review it. Ideally, it should be no more than 3 minutes long, but packed with facts and emotions. And bring your professional credentials. They might ask for your portfolio right there. Maria smiles at the prospect. This isn't just a case of dismissal. It's a platform for changing policy, reinforcing airline regulations, and training crews to collaborate with civilian medical personnel in emergencies. That's my goal. He picks up the empty envelope from the desk, the one that had previously contained the dismissal letter, and lets it rest next to his laptop, a symbol of transition. He lets the emotion flow. The anger at injustice has transformed into purpose. Can you imagine the impact if the president signs a directive recognizing the voluntary work of healthcare workers? He asks, his eyes shining. Anna approaches and hugs her. Today we will discuss protocols with the president. Tomorrow we will dissect your presentation point by point. You are ready, sister. Maria rests her hand on the doorknob. I'm going to need to rest a little. This weekend I'm going to sleep and review speeches. But tomorrow I'm focusing on the logistics of the trip. He leaves the room with a calm stride, knowing that the battle for his reinstatement has taken a giant leap. From the online petition to the Oval Office, his lungs fill with fresh air as, for the first time in days, his heart beats with the certainty that his fight can lead to real change. Maria spreads the thick, freshly printed dossier on the large glass table. Pages bound with black spines, each section separated by colored tabs. Medical certificates, university and graduate diplomas, letters of recommendation on official letterhead, passenger affidavits, and transcripts of audio messages. In front of her, Anna organizes the documents. Here are the advanced life support and critical care certificates. I printed them on heavyweight paper so they look professional, Anna says, sorting through 2 neat stacks. Maria nods, focused. Perfect. This section will contain the chronology of events. Flight, emergency call, defibrillation, compressions. We need this to be clear from the first page. Anna searches on her laptop and projects a provisional index on the screen. Cover page with your photo and contact information. Page 2, Table of Contents. Red tab, Training and Certifications. Blue tab, Intervention on Flight 342. Green tab, Testimonials and Support. Yellow tab, Recommendations and Recognitions. Maria reviews the order. Good. Now under Testimonies, I'll include Juan's letter and the audio transcript of his message. I want to include a photo of his boarding pass to identify him as a witness. Anna takes a manila envelope and labels it. Testimony of Juan Perez, passenger 15B. Here goes his signed statement and a screenshot of his messages. Maria places it next to other envelopes they already have. One with the recommendation from the supervisor at San Miguel Hospital, another with a letter from nurse Laura Ramos, and a third with a note from the College of Nursing confirming their membership and support for the case. "Do we have everything?" asks Maria. "Tell me if anything essential is missing." Anna consults the checklist in her notebook. "We've included your bachelor's degree, course diplomas, letters of recommendation, the hospital report, Juan's testimony, the college's endorsement, plus the Change.org signature chart in PDF format. I think it's a solid package." Maria takes a deep breath and smiles with relief. This speaks for itself. Now I'm going to draft the cover letter to the president. No more than half a page, but with the full force of our argument. He sits down in front of his laptop, opens a blank document, and begins to type in a voiceover. "Mr. President, I would like to address you to present an emblematic case of a professional vocation that deserves protection and encouragement. On July 21st, on Aerotzer's Flight 342, I intervened to save the life of a passenger in cardiac arrest. Despite having acted with full competence and supported by my training, I was dismissed for exceeding my duties. I ask for your support in recognizing and supporting the voluntary work of healthcare professionals in emergencies." Anna, from the side, suggests a change. "Perhaps I'd add a phrase highlighting the impact of citizen unity. Mention the 8,342 signatures of support and the backing of Congress." Maria nods and types. This petition has gathered more than 8,000 signatures, supported by testimonies from colleagues and the endorsement of Congress. Your involvement in this policy will ensure that no one puts their career at risk by acting in favor of life. Anna claps softly. "That's it. Now we print the letter on homemade letterhead and sign it at the bottom." Maria does so carefully and places the letter in a white envelope, stamping it with her professional seal. She looks at the entire arrangement. Dossier, letter, folders. She runs her hand along the spine of the main folder, like someone caressing an amulet. "Tomorrow, when I'm in the Oval Office, I'll deliver this directly to you. I want the president to see the effort and collaboration of so many people behind me." Anna puts away the last envelopes and closes the folder cover. It's proven that your struggle is not just personal, but a movement of solidarity. Now all that's left is to coordinate transportation and access protocols to the White House. Maria closes her laptop and, with a satisfied murmur, mentally reviews each step. Files ready, signed statements, legal certificates, cover letter. That's all I need. She stands up, picks up the folder, and carries it to the armchair, where she places it next to her coat. She checks herself in the hall mirror to make sure her civilian uniform is impeccable. A white blouse, dark pants, a modest jacket, and a pin with the College of Nursing logo on her lapel. She adjusts her hair and, with a determined air, heads to close the door. There's no turning back now. Tomorrow we'll fix everything in person, and nothing will stop my voice from being heard in the Oval Office. The official car departs at dawn from the local airport. Maria settles into the back seat, rests her file folder beside her, and watches through the window the golden reflection of the sun inaugurating the day. The driver, dressed in an impeccable dark suit and sober tie, turns the rear-view mirror toward her. "Ms. Gomez, good morning. Traffic is clear. We'll arrive in Washington, D.C. in approximately 30 minutes. Would you like to turn up the air conditioning a little?" Maria nods, eases the tension in her shoulders, and answers in a low voice. "Yes, please. It's cold after hours of preparation." As the warm air drifts through the cabin, Maria opens the folder. She mentally reviews the sequence of the meeting. The cover letter in the Oval Office, the documents arranged by tabs, and the passenger testimonies. She slides her finger over the cover. "I'd like the first document to convey the power of chronology. Every minute counts in the cockpit of that flight." The driver nods without taking his eyes off the road. Maria picks up her phone and sends a quick text to Anna. "All set. I'll be there shortly." Thank you for your unconditional support. Then she remembers she forgot a declaration sheet and touches the inside of her bag. There lies an extra envelope with backup copies. Satisfied, she replaces it on top of the folder. It's better to bring more, not less, she murmurs to herself. A slight vibration announces a new email. Confirmation of the security protocol for entering the White House. Maria reads softly. Ms. Gomez, remember to present your accreditation to the RCMP officers at the East Gate. Your official vehicle will be escorted to the reserve parking lot. She smiles with relief. Halfway through the journey, the driver turns onto Pennsylvania Avenue. The first federal buildings appear on the asphalt, and the gleam of the glass windows anticipates the magnitude of the place. The traffic increases, and the engine slows down. Maria rests her hand on her folder. I have to rehearse my speech, she whispers. 3 minutes exactly. Precise words, steady gaze. There can be no mistaking the urgency. The folder makes a slight rustle as she turns the pages. She closes her eyes for a moment and reviews the beginning. Mr. President, I stand before you as a representative of thousands of healthcare professionals. The echo of her own voice in her memory restores her confidence. As she turns the corner, she sees the green fence and the lampposts crowned with bronze eagles. The official car stops in front of a security archway. Maria adjusts her jacket, smooths her hair, and closes the folder decisively. The driver opens the back door. We've arrived, Mrs. Gomez. The officers will be waiting for you. Maria nods, takes the folder, and steps onto the pavement, feeling the weight of the morning and the hope of changing protocols with her testimony. The official car stopped in front of the green perimeter fence. The mounted police officers, in their dark uniforms and top-hatted caps, waited by the entrance gate, their mounts gleaming in the morning light. The chauffeur rolled down his window and nodded to one of the guards, a man with a stern but professional look. Good morning, officer, the driver said. Ms. Maria Gomez, accredited to the Oval Office, is representing the College of Nursing and the Chamber of Public Health. The agent exchanged a quick glance with his partner and nodded. Please show us your credentials, he asked, extending his hand. Maria carefully opened the back door, grabbed the file folder and her security badge, engraved with a QR code, and approached with a firm stride. She'd been imagining that moment for days, but now that she was here, the sound of the engine and the distant murmur of Pennsylvania Avenue seemed like distant echoes compared to the solemnity of the place. Here you go, he said, handing the badge to the agent. He took it with black gloves and, using a portable reader, scanned the code while typing on his tablet. Ms. Gomez, okay, you may proceed to the main building. Official vehicle access is reserved there. Welcome to the White House. Maria nodded gratefully. Thank you, he replied. Could you direct me to where I can park? The officer pointed to the side, where another patrol car was parked. Go straight ahead, and then turn left. An officer will direct you to your assigned space. Don't forget your folder. You'll need it at the internal checkpoint. Understood, Maria replied, returning to the car with the folder firmly in hand. The driver started the car smoothly and drove into the compound, closely followed by a black official vehicle carrying a member of the presidential security detail. Maria looked out the window at the carefully manicured gardens and the white buildings stretching to the horizon. Each step brought her closer to the Oval Office, where her voice and her documents would have the opportunity to make a real difference. Upon arriving at the official parking lot, a uniformed officer wearing a blue tie and a badge on his chest approached the car. Good morning, Mrs. Gomez. This way, please, he invited, opening the back door and offering his arm to Maria to guide her. She accepted the courteous gesture and stepped out of the vehicle, resting the folder on her forearm. As they walked through the covered walkway, the voices of other guests and the faint echo of heels mingled with the whirring of metal detectors, announcing a new checkpoint. You must go through the security arch and deposit your metal objects, the guard instructed as Maria placed her watch, car keys, and pen on the tray. Another officer, with a friendly but focused face, asked her to extend her arms for the body scanner. "Turn slightly, please," he ordered softly, and the sound of a low beep confirmed that he was not carrying any prohibited items. Maria retrieved her belongings, adjusted her coat, and replaced her pen among the books in her file. "Thank you," he said, carefully gathering everything. The officer smiled at her and added, "The next checkpoint is at the East Wing entrance. Then you'll be escorted to the Oval Office." Maria nodded, picked up her folder, and headed toward the main door of the East Wing. There, a long, bright hallway lined with red carpeting led her to a counter where another presidential receptionist greeted her, tablet in hand. "Ms. Gomez, welcome. The Oval Office is waiting for you at the back right. I have your name and the time here. Please come in." Maria gave the folder one last glance, like someone entrusting themselves to their papers before a big moment, and crossed the threshold into the wide corridor. The hallway lights reflected off the polished marble, and portraits of former presidents watched her silent passage. She felt a chill of responsibility, but also pride at having made it this far, with her story and that of so many colleagues behind her. With a determined step, she walked toward the door with the presidential emblem. Inside, the Oval Office awaited her, with the president and his team ready to listen. The grand main lobby of the White House greeted her with a solemn murmur. The clack of shoes on polished marble, the discreet footsteps of attendants, and the faint flicker of hanging lights. Maria strode forward, her file folder clutched at her side, while a security guard wearing a dark vest and earpiece guided her in with an elegant gesture. "This way, Mrs. Gomez," he said quietly. "The Oval Office is on the right, but you'll need to go through the waiting room first." Maria nodded, inhaled the air laden with history that flowed between the white walls, and crossed the massive entrance arch. To her right, presidential portraits of yesteryear gazed back at her with contemplative gaze. Washington, Lincoln, Roosevelt. To the left, side tables held delicate vases of flowers and trays of bottled water, beneath a raised sign that read, "Water for presidential guests." He took a few more steps and felt the weight of the folder vibrate against his thigh. He mentally reviewed the order of the documents. First the cover letter, then the dossier with chronology and certificates, then the signed testimonials, and finally, the graph with 8,342 signatures. Each fold, each tab, spoke of hours of work, of collective support, and of a just cause. Upon reaching a small, dark wooden counter, an assistant with thin glasses and a friendly smile was waiting for her. "Ms. Gomez, your place at the meeting is confirmed. You can leave your coat here and take a seat in the chair on your left. You will be called to the Oval Office shortly." Maria carefully hung her jacket over the back of a coat rack built into the furniture and sat in the navy blue upholstered armchair. Across from her, two other guests were waiting, a Harvard bioethics professor and a director of a children's hospital. They too were holding folders and looking at their own credentials, reviewing the content of their speeches. Meanwhile, a presidential aide passed by, handing out small bottles of water and tablets with the day's agenda. He stopped next to Maria and whispered, "In 5 minutes, the president will meet with everyone as a group. Remain calm and prepare your remarks. The order of speakers is alphabetical. You will be third, after the hospital director." Maria thanked him for the information and, for a moment, let her gaze rest on the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. Hundreds of crystals refracting the natural light coming from the windows at the opposite end. She felt a slight flutter in her stomach, the same mix of respect and responsibility that drove her on Flight 342, when every heartbeat could mean life or death. He turned discreetly towards the teacher and smiled at her. "Good morning. I'm Maria Gomez." She extended her hand with a cordial gesture, offering her folder. "I see we're both here to talk about protecting lives in critical situations. The teacher nodded, returning the greeting. A pleasure, Mrs. Gomez. Your case has generated a lot of interest. I will lobby for the College of Nursing to be consulted in future protocols. Maria acknowledged the promise with a nod. Thank you. It will be very valuable to integrate the views of all health professionals. The conversation was interrupted when a soft doorbell rang in the anteroom. An assistant poked his head out and announced, Mrs. Gomez, let's make way. The president will receive you now. Maria stood up with the folder in her arms, and as she walked through the door, she felt the lobby fall behind her. On the other side, a dark wood-paneled corridor led her directly to the conference room. With each step, her breathing became more measured, focused on the certainty that this moment could mark a turning point in the vocation of thousands of nurses. She paused before the large door adorned with the presidential seal, took one last look at the quiet hallway, and pushed the bronze handle. As she opened it, the bustle of aides, cameras, and cabinet members enveloped her, and she knew she was about to share her story with the nation's president. The interior of the Oval Office impresses Maria. A large oval, dark wood desk sits in the center, surrounded by burgundy leather armchairs. Blue folders and binders bearing the presidential seal rest on the table, along with neatly lined notebooks and pens. Two flags, the American and the presidential, flanked the window behind the desk, which overlooks the White House gardens. Diffused lights from the ceiling gently caress the gilt of the portrait frames on the walls. Maria advances with a measured stride, her folder of documents in her left hand. Upon entering, she lifts her chin slightly to greet the president, the First Lady, the Secretary of Health, and several strategic advisors who are watching her closely. The murmur dies down as the door closes behind her. A solemn silence, heavy with anticipation, pervades the room. Welcome, Mrs. Gomez, the president exclaimed warmly. I appreciate you coming here for this very noble purpose. Maria leaves the folder on one side of the table and bows in a sign of respect. Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here and have the opportunity to present an initiative that I trust will protect many health professionals in critical emergencies. The Secretary of Health, standing next to the president, nods and adds, We've reviewed your credentials and dossier. We appreciate the clarity of the documentation. We understand the hard work involved in gathering testimonials, certificates, and the support of thousands of citizens. Maria nods, her pulse held. In this dossier, you will find first, the cover letter addressed to you, Mr. President, followed by the detailed chronology of the events on Aerotzer's Flight 342. I have then compiled the signed testimonies of the passengers, the institutional recommendations, and the statistics for the petition, which has over 8,000 signatures. A presidential advisor, seated to the president's right, delicately opens the dossier and schemes the first section, her eyes reflecting a positive impression. Very comprehensive, she comments. I see the training and certifications section here, with its advanced life support diplomas, critical care courses, and the College of Nursing certification. Maria accompanies the reading with a slight, affirmative gesture. Exactly. I wanted to demonstrate that my involvement was not only voluntary, but also supported by solid academic and practical training. The president bows his head with interest. Ms. Gomez, could you briefly explain the chronology of your intervention? I'd like to understand the timing and actions that led to saving the passenger's life. Maria takes a deep breath, gathers her voice, and steps forward, looking at each of those present. Of course, at 10:15 a.m., the passenger suffered a cardiac arrest in row 15. After noticing the lack of a pulse and shallow breathing, I requested aisle space, reclined the seat, and prepared a makeshift stretcher. At 10:17 a.m., I administered the first defibrillator shock and began continuous chest compressions. At 10:20 a.m., the patient responded with a cough and partial recovery of his breathing. I ordered continued oxygen support until the emergency landing, which took place at 10:50 a.m. At 11:05 a.m., the patient was transferred to the ambulance and eventually admitted to the ICU in stable condition. Each sentence is accompanied by glances that confirm the precision of the timing. Now that she's explained the core of the case, Maria pauses for a second, looks at the blue folders and adds, "I've included the ambulance's heart rate monitor records and the paramedics' notes, which corroborate the effectiveness of the maneuvers." The president takes a sheet of paper with the petition graph. "I see you've garnered massive citizen support in record time. That demonstrates the social backing for this cause." Maria nods, suppressing the urge to exhale with relief. That's right. Millions of citizens understand that solidarity and professional duty must go hand in hand and not be penalized by rigid protocols. The First Lady plays with a pen on the table. "We believe this initiative will not only help nurses, but will also strengthen the response capacity for medical crises on board flights and in other settings where immediate medical care can make a difference." Mary, encouraged by receptivity, adds, "I propose a directive that includes advanced first aid courses for crews, official recognition of medical refugees, and exemption from liability for civilian professionals responding to emergencies." The Secretary of Health bows again. "It's a solid proposal. We'll evaluate the legal and logistical aspects. I think we can move forward with an executive order for immediate recognition." The presidential advisors nod and take quick notes. The president looks up at Maria. "Ms. Gomez, you have presented your arguments clearly and rigorously. We stand ready to work with you and Congress to formalize these measures." Maria feels that the effort of so many days culminates in that moment. She holds his gaze, her voice firm. "I deeply appreciate your support. I trust that together we will ensure that saving lives is not a reason for dismissal, but rather an act of recognition and national pride." The president smiles, bows his head, and extends his hand. "So, let's begin." Maria shakes his hand with respect and hope, knowing that the next step will formalize the reinstatement and recognition she has long sought. Maria raised the folder, her hands trembling slightly, and took a step forward, facing the attentive faces of the president and his advisors. She took a deep breath, looked out the large window behind the desk, and began. "Mr. President, a few weeks ago I was a passenger on an Airotser's flight when, suddenly, a man was struck dead in row 15. I had my emergency kit with me, and after realizing the seriousness of the situation," she said, unsheathing a sheet of paper, "I firmly requested space in the aisle from the crew to act." She paused briefly, and the Secretary of Health nodded, indicating that she should continue. Maria continued. "I immediately placed the adjacent seat in a nearly horizontal position, improvising a stretcher with folded backrests and several cushions. The flight attendant moved chairs and suitcases around me, and I was able to carefully position the patient. Next, I connected the portable defibrillator to the emergency power supply and applied the pads to his chest, just as shown here in the machine report. I pressed the shock button. The patient's body jerked, and after the second cycle of continuous chest compressions, hands clasped, depth and rate as per protocol, he began to regain a weak pulse and more stable breathing. He held the president's gaze to gauge his reaction. At that moment, I requested oxygen from the cabin crew and maintained the maneuvers until the emergency landing. Upon descent, the patient was handed over to the paramedics, who confirmed the effectiveness of my interventions based on advanced life support training. The hospital report, here, Maria pointed to another page, certifies that he was admitted conscious and with stable vital signs. The First Lady bowed her head, visibly moved. The timing, precision, and the quality of the support are impressive. Maria nodded and stepped to the right, showing another section of the dossier. I've included in this section the signed statements of eyewitnesses, passengers who saw the man regain his breath, the flight attendant who assisted, and the young man who provided the towel that cushioned the patient's head. They all agree that my intervention was the difference between life and death. I've also attached the ambulance heart monitor record, which reflects the recovery curve after shock and the compressions performed at 30 for every 2 breaths. The Secretary of Health consulted a graph projected on the tablet. The concordance between the chronology and the medical data is clear. This reinforces the argument that qualified professionals can and should be authorized to respond to emergencies on board. Maria took advantage of the gesture to link to the reform proposal. Exactly. That's where my proposal for a voluntary directive for airlines comes from. It includes, first, a collaboration protocol with accredited civilian health workers. Second, exemption from criminal and civil liability for good faith actions. And third, a basic cardiovascular emergency course for cabin crew. The president leaned over the table, studying a sheet of paper. Your suggestions are coherent and feasible. I consider their implementation in the FAA and IATA regulations urgent. Maria, with a softer but firm voice, closed her presentation. I appreciate your time. This dossier not only reflects my experience, but also the support of thousands of citizens who believe in solidarity and the duty to act. I remain at your disposal to collaborate in drafting the executive order. A murmur of approval ran through the room. The Secretary of Health shook Maria's hand. Your chronological account is impeccable and moving. We will proceed to integrate these documents into the immediate reform proposal. Maria picked up the folder, offering a grateful smile. Thank you, Mr. President, for listening and recognizing the value of those who, in the right place and time, join their voices with that of life itself. The president nodded solemnly, marking the end of his remarks, and the sky of Washington, D.C. seemed to vibrate with the echo of his words. The presidential advisors leaned across the large oval table as they exchanged printed and digital documents. To the president's left, the chief of staff held an FAA report on emergency protocols for commercial flights. To the right, the Secretary of Health reviewed a memo on civil liability for medical volunteers. Maria, her file folder still open, looked up to participate in the discussion. I've reviewed this FAA document, the Chief of Staff said. According to Section 5.3, only airline-assigned medical personnel may use the onboard defibrillator. Any further intervention could void insurance policies and expose the company to multi-million-dollar lawsuits. Maria slid one of the sheets containing her proposed executive directive, highlighting the paragraph that included the disclaimer. I understand the legal risk, but this proposal introduces a good faith clause that protects both the medical volunteer and the airline. In the event of an emergency, the action of a certified professional will be recognized as an act of public service and exempt from civil or criminal penalties, he explained, pointing to the section with his pen. The Secretary of Health exchanged a glance with the legal advisor. If we include that clause, we need to clearly define who qualifies as a certified professional. Your document cites certification and advanced life support courses, but how do we verify that in a high-pressure environment? Maria replied calmly, I propose a digital credential system that can be validated in real time. Each registered nurse will have a smart card with a QR code, accessible to cabin crew via an app. In my case, the credential I presented was scanned at the entrance, but the technology exists and can be implemented immediately. The Chief of Staff took note and turned to the President. This will require cooperation with the FAA and the airlines, as well as an express training protocol for crews. We would need to allocate a budget for technological development and annual training. Maria met the President's gaze and articulated her counterargument. Investing in training and technology will reduce the costs of poorly managed emergency situations. Every minute of delay in onboard medical care can result in serious consequences, increasing hospital costs and compensation. The free and flexible nature of the treatment proposed by the directive will improve airline safety and reputation. The Secretary of Health opened another page with statistics. Data from San Miguel Hospital, he said, indicate that 70% of patients in cardiac arrest survive if they receive care within 5 minutes. On a flight, that margin is critical. Your intervention saved that vital window. Maria nodded and added, exactly. If the crew has immediate guidance from a medic with validated credentials, we gain those precious minutes. The president, with a thoughtful gesture, picked up both reports and placed them in front of him. I've heard the legal risks and the medical and economic benefits. I believe we can balance protocol with civil liability. I'm proposing an executive order enabling a 6-month pilot project on domestic routes, validating credentials and training crews. At the end of the period, we will evaluate the results and adjust the FAA regulations. The advisors nodded approvingly. The legal advisor took the official pen, while the Secretary of Health placed the document under his signature. Maria breathed deeply as she watched the executive order materialize on the blank sheet of paper. Thank you very much, Mr. President, Maria said, her voice thick with emotion. This project will not only save lives, but it will also strengthen passenger confidence and the resilience of our aviation industry. The president turned to her, smiling. Your courage has taught us that rules should serve the common good, not restrict it. With your help, we will make this directive a global example. Maria nodded and held her gaze steady, aware that that debate had marked the triumph of life and solidarity. The presidential advisor carefully slides his pen over the document, rests the tip, and draws a firm line under the title Executive Order for the Recognition of the Voluntary Work of Healthcare Professionals in Airborne Emergencies. As he looks up, his eyes reflect the solemnity of the moment. Hundreds of signatures, thousands of testimonies, dozens of documents, and silent applause from the room acknowledging the historic significance of this signature. With this, the pilot directive that will allow registered nurses and healthcare professionals to act in emergency situations on board is formally approved, exempt from civil or criminal liability when acting in good faith. The advisor announced, raising his quill and letting the last drops of ink rest on the white parchment. Maria, standing at the oval table, holds her breath. To her right, the Secretary of Health nods with satisfaction. To her left, the President's Chief of Staff mentally notes the next steps on her agenda. The President, his gaze intent, leans forward and says, Ms. Gomez, I deeply appreciate your commitment and courage. Thanks to your initiative and the support of citizens, we are taking a decisive step toward protecting those who, like you, do not hesitate to save lives even outside of their official duties. Maria closes her eyes for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of his words. When she opens them again, his voice sounds firm. Mr. President, I thank you on behalf of all the healthcare professionals who protect lives beyond their work hours. This executive order not only reinstates my position, but also recognizes the dedication and solidarity of thousands who risk their safety to assist in emergencies. The presidential advisor extends his hand toward Maria, inviting her to sign as a witness to the order. She takes the pen, her hand no longer trembling. On the table, next to the advisor's signature, she signs her signature under the heading Witness and Promoter of the Directive. A slight smile spreads across her face as she places the pen on the paper and feels the light touch of the ink embroidery. With your signature, Ms. Gomez, you become the first person reinstated under this new mandate, the man comments, returning the pen to its official case. The president nods and addresses her, shaking her hand. The order states, Ms. Maria Gomez will be reinstated to her position at Aerotours Airlines, effective immediately, with all the rights and benefits to which she is entitled, and will be recognized with a White House plaque. Congratulations! Maria takes a deep breath and nods, excited. It's an honor and a great responsibility. I'm committed to collaborating in the implementation of the pilot program and disseminating best practices that will save more lives. The Secretary of Health passes a small picture with the design of the presidential plaque in front of him. Here's your award. Wear it proudly. It symbolizes the nation's gratitude. Maria accepts the plaque, holds it with both hands, and in a soft voice says, "Thank you." It represents the voice of all those who give their all in critical situations. This plaque is a reminder that every effort counts. The First Lady steps forward and places the plaque on a varnished wooden pedestal, in front of the presidential and American flags. Then, delicately, she fastens the clip holding it to the stand. We want this plaque to remain a symbol of inspiration for future generations of healthcare professionals, he explains in a warm voice. Maria watches as the golden reflection of the plaque catches the light in the room, casting sparkles on the marble. For the first time in days, she feels completely at peace with her vocation and with official recognition. The president addresses all those present. Thank you for your teamwork and for believing in the value of life. Today we take an important step toward making courage the norm, not the exception. The advisors and cabinet members applaud softly. Maria utters one last sentence, looking directly into the cameras that recorded the entire process. Saving lives isn't a crime, it's a duty. Thank you for listening to this cause. With a final gesture, he closes the folder and leaves with the group. As the room returns to its usual rhythm, the signed executive order rests next to the plaque, a silent witness to a collective triumph. The reinstatement of a nurse and the recognition of solidarity as state policy. Maria leaves the Oval Office with the plaque of honor clutched tightly to her chest, feeling the pulse of history beating with every step. Upon crossing the dark wood door, she is respectfully greeted by a presidential aide holding a velvet case for official documents. She nods with a grateful smile and says quietly, "Thank you for all the support. This recognition is from everyone who believed in me." A guard raises his hand slightly in a gesture of courtesy as he guides Maria down a chandelier-lit hallway adorned with portraits of past presidents. Beside her, the chief of staff whispers, "The press is waiting for you in the south courtyard. Everyone is very excited to see you emerge with your badge." Maria takes a deep breath and mentally reviews her words for the meeting with the journalists. As she turns the last corner, she perceives the growing murmur and the ticking of camera flashes. As she passes through the double doors, the morning sun envelopes her, like a warm embrace after the solemnity of the room. She pauses for a moment, her hand raised in a pause signal, and says, "Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this special day." A reporter raises the microphone. "Mrs. Gomez, what message would you like to share with the country at this time of celebration?" Maria raises the plaque to the microphone, allowing the presidential logo to be reflected in the lenses. This recognition represents the courage of all healthcare professionals who intervene when no one else can. Today is not my triumph, but the example of solidarity that saves lives. Thank you for supporting justice and compassion in every corner of our nation. As she speaks, a group of nurses and doctors watching the live broadcast on their phones burst into quiet applause at the back of the courtyard. Maria smiles and lowers her voice to offer a personal thank you. "To my colleagues, never stop acting with your heart. The future of healthcare depends on our determination." As she descends the steps leading to the lawn, she feels the cool touch of the badge in her hands and the warmth of the sun caressing her face. A gentle breeze stirs her hair, carrying with it the scent of flowers and the breath of hope. An officer directs traffic, while Maria waves a final goodbye to the courtyard. "See you in the next phase, protecting lives wherever we're needed." She climbs into the official car, places the license plate on the passenger seat, and looks out the window at the White House silhouetted against the horizon, majestic and watchful. Looking up, She breathes a sigh of relief and gratitude, feeling that the collective effort has forever changed the course of her career and the destiny of so many professionals. A wave of golden light paints the sky. Maria smiles at the sun with the promise of a new dawn in health and justice.